Story 1.
After a DNA test uncovered my wife's cheating, I exposed her affair, got revenge, and walked away. On a late Friday evening in my office, I was assessing a few candidates who had heard about an upcoming vacancy in our office staff. I served as the regional head of a chemical company supplying products for control, fertilizer, and water containment for soil. Our company relied heavily on farmers who cultivated or supplied our food. Being environmentally conscious, we proudly boasted our products as completely eco-friendly, a pioneering move in our industry. 2 of my office staff's spouses had been promoted, prompting them to tender their resignations. Both would be relocating within the next 3 months, sparking a rush to fill their positions swiftly. Our sales team operated across 8 states in the heart of the nation, surpassing our sales projections this year, which was a significant achievement. Kathy, my executive assistant, popped her head into my office to inform me, "Ed, all 8 candidates have confirmed their interview appointments for Monday. I'm off for the night." Every Thursday, I traveled to one of the states under my jurisdiction to conduct a half-day sales meeting on Fridays before returning home. Consequently, Thursday nights had become my wife's designated evening to socialize with her friends, albeit incurring considerable babysitting expenses. Over the years, my weekly excursions provided crucial face-to-face support for our sales representatives, fostering their job performance and problem-solving skills. This investment had yielded substantial returns over the years, with not a single resignation in 8 years, an accomplishment for our company. Today, I had just made it back in time to wrap up a few tasks before heading home. The company had persistently urged me to relinquish this aspect of my role, but I found the solitude during these trips invaluable for contemplation. With a wife who knew everything and 3 children, these moments of quiet reflection during drives were invaluable. Besides, sparing the branch the expense of hiring a sales manager, maintaining a record of staying under budget was a priority for me. With our children in junior and senior high school, our eldest, a source of immense pride, was set to graduate and attend Southeast Missouri University in the fall. Our family was in a favorable position. Her full scholarship, awarded by my employer, was a significant boon. Our youngest daughter, just 16, was busy preparing for her learner's permit. Grace, my wife of 20 years, served as the executive assistant to the district attorney. Since our youngest's birth, the district attorney had recently been offered a lucrative position with the federal government, which he promptly accepted. Known for his no-nonsense approach, it was a no-brainer, given the substantial increase in salary. Despite being roughly the same age as me, he had never married. Contrary to rumors, I doubted he was gay. For the past 15 years, my parents had graciously taken our 3 children every second weekend of the month, affording my wife and me some much-needed quality time together. This gesture came at a pivotal moment in our marriage, allowing us to rediscover ourselves and ultimately strengthening our bond. Without their support, we might have added to the divorce statistics. They had approximately 3 months left before this chapter would close, as my eldest, Amy, was set to intern in our senator's office in Washington over the summer, before embarking on her political science studies at the university. A while back, my dad, on a whim, purchased Ancestry.com kits for each of our 3 children with my consent and submitted them as a gesture. Following their guidelines, we understood that a match would only occur if a relative had also submitted their DNA. My children discussed it with me and I granted permission, acknowledging that we all have distant relatives we might not know about. Perhaps, it would lead us on a new journey. Amy suggested keeping it a surprise for her mother until we received the results, aware it could take 5 or 6 months. This weekend, we were traveling to Nashville to attend the Grand Ole Opry and would return home on Sunday. It was my wife who organized this special trip, aiming to create another cherished memory in our journey together. Update. During my final year at university, I crossed paths with my wife Grace at a football game. Contrary to being a player on the field, I was one of those anonymous vendors peddling overpriced snacks to the crowd. Grace, being one of the daughters of the team's medical staff, always had complimentary tickets at her disposal. An altercation ensued between her and her date over a trivial matter, resulting in a shove that inadvertently involved me. As she pushed him away, he collided with me, sending me tumbling down the concrete stairs with my food tray in tow. I regained consciousness in the hospital, my head swathed in bandages, the doctor informing me of 25 stitches due to a split forehead. Grace visited me daily, burdened with guilt, and met my entire family during my recovery from a week-long coma caused by internal injuries. As the haze lifted from my sight, I perceived an unfamiliar goddess-like figure before me, initially mistaking her for a celestial being guiding me to the afterlife. Yet the reality of my girlfriend, Esmeralda, standing by her side brought clarity albeit disappointment, to her reaction. Hoping it was all a dream, I drifted back into sleep, yearning for Esmeralda's absence upon awakening. A wish that materialized when I opened my eyes to find her gone, replaced by Grace, who steadfastly supported me as I pieced my life back together. Though I never formally asked her, our relationship naturally evolved, culminating in marriage 3 months later. As Grace walked down the aisle, captivating with her 5 feet 8 inches stature, long blonde locks, deep blue-black eyes, and an enviable figure, by our 5th year together, we found ourselves at a crossroads, contemplating separation without fully comprehending the reasons behind our drift. Despite my confusion, Grace and I remained committed, eventually resolving to overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. We had just departed from Lambert's on our way home, a restaurant coasting on its reputation. Their claim to fame was tossing large buns across the room for customers to catch, overshadowing the otherwise lackluster, overcooked food. We made the stop at this tourist trap because it evoked memories of my wife's mother's cooking. Need I say more? Grace initiated a conversation with me, expressing her thoughts on the concept of infidelity within our marriage. She suggested that I should explore the idea of having an affair, indicating that she would approve of it. Grace reasoned that societal norms regarding marriage vows had changed, and that I should reconsider my stance. She believed that such an experience might enrich our relationship and deepen our understanding of each other. Her perspective troubled me, suggesting a willingness to exploit others for personal gratification, a stance I couldn't accept. It revealed a side of her I hadn't seen before, reshaping my perceptions considerably. "Let me ask you this, my dear wife," I countered. "Why is it so important to you that I have your blessing for an affair? Have I done something so repulsive that you're seeking a reason to end our marriage?" 5 minutes of silence ensued before I resumed the music, her lack of response speaking volumes. Grace was always quick with an answer, but now she was silent, leaving me to ponder why. I couldn't shake the feeling that my wife's sudden approval of an affair was significant, though its motive remained elusive. Regardless, I was convinced something was amiss in our lives, and resolved to uncover it. Driving for an hour, we were about 40 miles from home when Grace again silenced the sound. I switched on the recorder once more. "I apologize, Ed," she said. "I suppose I've been indulging in too many Harley Quinn romance stories. Those notions must have come from out of nowhere." Having said that, she resumed the sound system, assuming the matter was settled. However, the dilemma arose from the fact that both our children and I knew she despised those books, as they had been her mother's favorite throughout her life. She had dismissed them as lowbrow and beneath her. Whenever her mother passed the latest additions to her, Grace would promptly discard them. During the last leg of our drive, I realized the only aspect of her life I knew little about was her Thursday night outings with her friends. It hadn't seemed significant or concerning enough to inquire about. On the rare occasions when I was home, she willingly altered her plans to spend the evening with me. Until today, I had no reason to doubt those nights, as I had complete trust in her. However, following our recent conversation, I found myself questioning the nature of her girls' night out. Was she frequenting bars with her friends, engaging in questionable activities like one-night stands? By the time we arrived home, I resolved to uncover the truth about her Thursday night outings. After settling in at home, I spent some time with my parents, enjoying their company and hearing about their weekend activities. They mentioned wanting to have a private chat with me the following day, expressing concern about my wife and her youngest daughter, but didn't elaborate further. We agreed to meet around 3 when I would be available after my job interviews. Later, when saying goodbye, I assured them I'd address their concerns after work. Once they left, I informed my wife about the plan to visit my parents the next day to fix something, ensuring she was aware of the potential delay for dinner. She acknowledged it, assuring me it was fine to eat later. My dad and mom arrived promptly, and we ushered them into my office. After settling in, we waited for one of the staff to bring us coffee. Once served, Kathy closed the door as she left. "Ed," my dad began, "I deeply regret sending in our grandchildren's DNA. They found a match for April. She has a grandmother on her father's side searching for her son and his descendants." With that, he produced the form from Ancestry.com displaying a lady's name and phone number. I was devastated, and my father could see the impact the news had on me. "Dad, I don't believe it's a mistake. Let's see what we can find out together," I said, using the office phone. I dialed the number and activated both the recording and speaker functions to ensure a permanent record of the conversation. After 2 rings, someone answered. "I'm Edward Paul Adams, seeking Mrs. Beatrice Smith regarding a DNA match from Ancestry.com," I explained. "May I speak with her?" "You're speaking with her, young man," came the reply. "What can I do for you?" "It's complicated," I replied. Long story short, I've just learned that my youngest daughter is your granddaughter. Are you referring to April Marie Adams? She asked. Yes, I confirmed. Then perhaps you know my son, whom I had to give up for adoption at 15, Mrs. Smith continued. I might, if I knew his name, I responded. He was adopted by a family named Barrow. His given names were Luke Robert, Mrs. Smith revealed. My heart sank. My parents and I recognized the name all too well. Her candid admission had turned into a nightmare for me. He's alive and well, I disclosed. Currently, he serves as the district attorney here in Cape Girardeau County, Missouri. He's also my wife's boss, and now I think I understand why he never married. He's my only child, Mrs. Smith confessed. I'm battling stage 4 lung cancer and don't have much time left. Would you allow April to visit me before I pass away? If needed, I'll cover the expenses. I want to meet her and pass on my estate to her. Given the circumstances, I'll let you coordinate with my parents. They'll arrange for her to visit this weekend. I agreed. But I can't let her travel alone. Is there anything else you need? Please provide a notary statement from my lawyer to conduct a DNA test, Mrs. Smith requested. He'll want to verify her identity before changing my will, given the value of her inheritance. No problem, I said. I'll hand over the call to my dad and he'll handle the details, I assured her, exiting my office. I handed Kathy my personal recorder, instructing her to transcribe and notarize both my conversation and the phone call. This is necessary for the divorce proceedings, I added. Do you want the authorization for the DNA test drawn up too? Kathy inquired, demonstrating her keen awareness of the situation. Yes, please, but keep it quiet for a few weeks. I want to investigate my soon-to-be ex-wife's Thursday night activities, I replied. Turning to my assistant David, I requested his and his wife's cooperation for a personal matter, signaling the seriousness of the situation. Shorty should be finishing her dispatch soon. I'll text her to come over right away, David responded, recognizing the gravity of the situation. I returned to my office and we reached an agreement. Using the spare key they had for my house, they planned to pack some clothes for April and leave next Friday. I'd have her pulled out of school and drop her off at their place by 10. As I saw my parents off, David's wife entered. I directed her to his office, where I'd join them shortly. Thanks to modern communication methods, Kathy had already made copies and transcribed the documents. I handed David and Cheryl a copy, suggesting they start with my conversation with my wife. I gave Kathy the paperwork my dad had provided to make copies for my lawyer's files, instructing her to find the best. Cheryl and David, longtime acquaintances, were deeply affected by recent revelations concerning my wife and me. Cheryl particularly had a close relationship with Grace, having grown up as neighbors. The discovery of the truth had left them both shocked. We discussed potential actions to uncover more information. I suggested a plan involving David using my company car for sales trips, while Cheryl would use David's car with the pretext of cross-training for the next 3 months. Meanwhile, I planned to follow my wife on Thursday nights to gather evidence discreetly. My suspicion grew as I recounted recent events, particularly Grace's suggestion for me to have an affair. I speculated that she might be planning to move with Luke Robert Barrow, which could lead to justifying a divorce in her eyes if she could prove my infidelity. Cheryl expressed her agreement and suggested involving the police to gather more detailed information about their activities. She even mentioned a contact who could help arrange it. Later, Kathy informed us about Dale Allen Britton's departure from the district attorney's office and his new practice. Cheryl asked me to convey her regards to Dale when I visited him. In summary, we devised a plan to uncover more information and sought legal counsel to handle the situation. I left to meet Dale, a man involved in the women's right to life movement, challenging Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court. His unconventional approach to the law was shaking up everything he touched. Things started to make sense. My marital issues with Grace coincided with her employment under Luke Barrow around the time I was promoted to sales manager, requiring frequent overnight sales meetings. If they were indeed having an affair every Thursday night, I had unknowingly been deceived for over 15 years. The expensive gifts from Luke to Grace now seemed suspicious. Dale was ready for me when I arrived. Cheryl had briefed him on our plans. He provided me with access to Luke Barrow's house and the alarm code, handing me a phone number. He said it would connect me with helpful services at a reasonable price. Having grown up on the streets, Dale still had connections to get things done. The access codes he provided would remain valid until the end of the week, after which Luke would be reminded to change them. Dale planned to sue Barrow for child support from April's birth, potentially bankrupting him under state law. He also suggested temporarily transferring my parental authority to my parents until the court case concluded, to prevent accusations of manipulation. I offered to pay him up front, but he declined, fearing Grace would detect it. Instead, he requested a check to be cashed after the legal proceedings commenced. His strategic thinking assured me that he had my best interests at heart. I left with the impression that Dale had his own motives for targeting Luke Barrow. Both Grace and Luke were in for a rude awakening. Dale Britton had devised his own strategy for the divorce proceedings. Update: I completed all necessary paperwork, granting my parents parental rights over April starting Friday, and provided them with a copy. After Dale and I briefed them on the situation, they agreed it was the right move. I waited for Cheryl to arrive in her 2002 Ford Taurus as David was away on his first sales trip. Cheryl would leave her car with me and take David's home. My eldest informed me that their mother wouldn't be home for dinner, joining her friends straight from work. Once Cheryl arrived, we swapped cars and I packed my suitcase in the trunk. "Ed," Cheryl said, "dispatch and the guys are ready. Just tell me where to go." "Thanks," I replied. "Dale wants me to call him if we proceed so he can serve them personally. I'm curious about Dale's vendetta against Luke Barrow." "Dale's all about principles," Cheryl explained. "Luke's known for not sticking to his word." It was intriguing to observe Grace and Luke depart in separate cars, meeting later at Charlie's Bar and Grill for dinner. Afterward, they went their separate ways. I positioned myself near Luke Barrow's residence with Dale's associates, now my team, fully prepared. I had a clear view of Luke's house from a safe location. Grace arrived first, disabling the alarm with a code and unlocking the door. We recorded her entering. Moments later, Luke pulled in, and Grace greeted him at the door. Her blouse was open, braless, revealing her cleavage. Luke embraced her, kissing passionately as they entered. I ceased filming. 6 rooms in Luke's house were wired for audio and video, courtesy of his neighbor's son, serving time. Everything inside was streamed live on their Facebook pages. They were monitoring my car, expecting me to seek a new romantic interest. Anticipating this, they had hired a courtesan who matched my preferences. I alerted Cheryl, who informed David. As an ex-Marine, he skillfully veered off-road safely at 10 p.m., then called for assistance. Cheryl notified me, and I confirmed the green light, providing the address. While awaiting developments, I tampered with the valves in their car tires, ensuring they couldn't escape the predicament they were about to face. The adulterous pair wouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon. The police officers arrived, sirens blaring, and banged on the door seeking Grace Adams. Luke Barrow initially denied her presence until the cops pointed out her car in the driveway. Grace eventually appeared, clad only in a bedsheet. "Mrs. Grace Adams, your husband, Edward Paul's car, was in a motor vehicle accident near Little Rock, Arkansas. We were directed to check here by your parents when we couldn't locate you," the officer stated, intentionally misleading her. Grace's face paled at the news. As the police departed, I followed closely behind. Every moment from their arrival to departure was recorded and streamed live on Facebook, providing irrefutable evidence of the ongoing affair to the citizens of Cape. At midnight, my daughter Amy called in distress, reporting that her mother hadn't returned home and wasn't answering calls. I advised her to contact Luke Barrow and insisted he put Grace on the phone. "Why him?" Amy questioned. "He's been her Thursday night companion for over 16 years, I revealed. After sending Amy a clip of Grace and Luke's encounter with the police, she soon discovered her mother's deception. Upon Amy's revelation, I instructed her to open the front door, preparing to confront Grace. As I retrieved my suitcase from the car, Dale Allen Britton called, informing me he had served restraining orders against Grace and Luke, prohibiting them from coming near us. "Amy, open the garage so I can park Cheryl's car inside," I instructed, pretending to be on my way to Little Rock. We complied with the plan. Amy questioned the recent locksmith visit, to which I confirmed it was part of our preparations, prompted by the DNA test my father submitted to Ancestry. Revealing a match for April and uncovering Grace's connection to her boss, who turned out to be the son she gave up for adoption at 15. Amy, my daughter, became emotional. I embraced her tightly until she regained composure. Then we dimmed the lights and retreated to the kitchen for a private conversation. I activated my voice recorder and played the discussion between her mother and me during our return journey from Nashville. It provided Amy with insight into her mother's words firsthand. "Why would Mom encourage you to have an affair, Dad?" Amy inquired. "To mitigate the consequences of her own actions if they were ever exposed," I replied. Ironically, her suggestion led to the truth emerging. A soft knock interrupted us. Since I wasn't expected to be home, Amy answered the door. It was a police officer who informed us that they had intercepted a taxi carrying Grace. They warned her of violating a court order if she proceeded further. Throughout the night, my eldest daughter and I discussed Grace's actions. We both agreed that, given her talent for storytelling during her girls' night out, she should have pursued a career in writing. Amy expressed disbelief at the revelation that her mother had been having an affair with the same man for over 16 years. She wondered why they hadn't noticed sooner. I explained that it was easy to overlook because the kids were young and I frequently traveled for work. Trusting in our relationship and seeing no reason to question Grace's activities. Amy reflected on how their trust in Grace had blinded them to the truth, realizing the extent of Grace's manipulation. I was stunned, Amy pointed out. The most painful aspect was how Grace had exploited their trust to maintain her affair. As Amy went to make coffee, I noticed the dawn approaching and received a text from Grace, urgently requesting to talk about a family issue concerning our oldest child before my return from the trip. Deciding how to respond, I reassured Amy and replied to Grace's message, declining her manipulation and informing her that she could continue her plans with Luke Barrow, but without the kids. I explained that Grace had wanted me to start an affair to use against me in divorce court and never expected to be caught after so many years. It must have been painful for Amy to hear the truth. Many struggled to accept harsh realities. Eventually, they will come to terms with it. I embraced my daughter as she shed tears once more. We had just calmed her down when Eric and April woke up. I turned on the kitchen TV to watch the morning news. Soon they joined us for breakfast, surprised to see me at home. We were all taken aback when my wife's image appeared on the screen. My son raised the volume out of curiosity. My heart went out to my kids as they heard Grace and Luke disparaging me, calling me foolish and clueless. Their mother then made a sarcastic comment about me, which caused both of them to burst into laughter. The reporter interjected, suggesting that they weren't laughing anymore after the scheme they had orchestrated to set up Edward Adams with a professional escort had backfired. The scene shifted to Dale serving them both with lawsuits, with the news reporter elaborating on the details. Alice ran to me, sobbing, and sat on my lap, discovering in a harsh way that her biological father wasn't her father but her mother's long-term lover. Eric summed it up aptly, questioning what their mother's view of their father meant for the rest of them. Once April had composed herself, Amy and I explained what had occurred since their mother and I returned from Nashville. I arranged for them to be excused from school on Friday and Monday to process their emotions. Just as we were about to start breakfast, April exclaimed that the police chief was on the line. That caught our attention, so we turned up the volume. It was publicly announced that both Grace Adams and Luke Barrow, our current district attorney, were under criminal investigation. A special team from across the county was assembled to lead the inquiry. I thought to myself that when one's private actions become public, society cannot overlook them. Hypocrisy arises in our society every day. After breakfast and tidying up, I had my 3 children sit down at the table. I showed each of them a copy of the letter my dad had received. Then I said, "April, my parents are picking you up to take you to meet your biological dad's mother. She's terminally ill and has requested to see you. There's a significant reason behind it, but I think it's best for the lady you're meeting to explain it to you. As far as I'm concerned, you are my daughter and always will be. If you have any questions, ask your grandparents." "Amy, can you assist your sister in packing for the weekend while I call my parents?" I asked. Once the girls left, my son asked, "How are you handling this, Dad?" "I'm struggling," I admitted. "I'm constantly fighting to keep myself composed." "Remember, son, if this ever happens to you as a father, you have to stay strong for everyone else in your life." With that said, I called my parents and explained my whereabouts. They said they would come over as soon as they finished packing their car. They still had an hour before their flight. It was in that moment that my sons and my relationship changed forever, for the better. The 3 of us watched the daughter I had raised leave with my parents to meet her biological grandmother for the first time. I prayed fervently that it would go well, and that she would return feeling the same about me. The atmosphere at the local district attorney's office resembled a morgue. Grace Adams had gone out to buy new clothes after having her car towed and the 4 tire stems replaced. Meanwhile, Luke Barrow was reviewing the lawsuit against him. Although they lacked a direct DNA sample, the biological link was undeniable, leaving him unable to deny parentage. The truth about their relationship and long-term affair had become known to everyone on staff. This, along with concealing April Adams's true parentage, was turning into a political nightmare. Fraud under the law had evolved to encompass the failure to disclose all pertinent facts, leading Dale to sue both Grace and Luke jointly in a civil suit. It increasingly appeared that they had been deceiving Grace's husband, Ed, for years. While many lawyers affirmed Ed Adams and Dale Britton's likely success, those contacted so far were unwilling to get involved. Likely due to Dale's formidable reputation in court, The Facebook exposure of their conduct and their admission of attempting to ruin an honest man to benefit themselves was headline news, given Ed's societal position. Grace, having frequented a familiar clothing store for years, never anticipated being confronted by a woman accusing her of insanity, claiming she should have foreseen the consequences. This revelation came when the lady accused her of appearing in compromising photos on Facebook for hours. Upon returning to Luke's house, Grace found a company finishing a service call, assuming she was the homeowner and suggesting resetting the security codes. Only later did she realize the lack of electronic signature verification. Calling Luke, Grace questioned who was trying to sabotage his new position in St. Louis, prompting her to reveal her discoveries. They both suspected deeper motives beyond Ed protecting himself, given the political nature of his new job. After making coffee, Grace reviewed the divorce petition. It stung to realize that her own words had aroused her husband's suspicions, especially her requests for him to deliberately damage others. Furthermore, the revelation from Mom and Dad Adams about the ancestry.com DNA match exposed April's true parentage, offering undeniable proof of her affair and potentially jeopardizing their marriage before April's birth. At that moment, she realized Ed needed to know if the affair was ongoing. He had orchestrated the events of the previous night, revealing hidden truths about her life. Just as she took another sip of coffee, the doorbell rang. Rising, she answered it to find the neighbor Luke disliked, Mr. Primrose. She greeted, "What can I do for you?" Handing her a legal envelope, he explained, "Ed used my place as a base for his operations against you and your long-term lover last night. I permitted it gladly, as Luke Barrow had my son sentenced to the maximum. The information in this envelope shared with you last night will also be delivered to everyone on your side of the family this afternoon." Ed asked if you're still laughing at him. Watching him walk away with a broad smile, Grace returned to the kitchen and opened the envelope filled with incriminating pictures. They depicted her entering Luke's house with her key, greeting him at the door, engaging in lewd activities, and being confronted by police officers. Ed's team was efficient, making it seem like he collaborated with police officers seeking retribution against Luke. The final signed page by her husband revealed the potential for significant public fallout, jeopardizing her plans to assert control over him. Now the priority was damage control to mitigate the fallout from Ed's public disclosure. Grace, by last Sunday evening, upon returning home from Nashville, it became apparent to me that you were scheming to orchestrate our divorce. Since then, I've been trying to discern what led your affection for me to transform into pure animosity. Now I understand the reason behind it. I realize you hold me responsible for what you perceive as deficiencies in your life during the period when we only had our 2 children. It seems you felt confined in our marriage and yearned for the carefree days of being single again. Otherwise, you wouldn't have willingly sought solace in another man to relive the single life. By doing so, you allowed him to temporarily whisk you away from what you despised a few hours each week. I recognize that the sole reason you remained in a marriage with a man you despised and saw as lifeless was because Luke didn't want the burden of raising kids, not even his own. With your perception of me, there was no way you'd leave the children alone with someone you considered worthless. Your pride wouldn't allow it, leading you to endure a lifetime of deliberate falsehoods. Every day you both evaded consequences, your disdain for me grew. I became increasingly foolish and incompetent in your eyes. How much laughter did you and Luke share at the expense of the oblivious, betrayed man? Did you boost his affection for you by belittling or mocking me? What I can't forgive or forget is the message you and the one you regard as your true husband have conveyed to our children, as it will shape their lives indefinitely. I've yet to comprehend the extent of amusement, Luke, and you derived from manipulating me and our children's lives, as if we were mere pawns on a chessboard. The Cavos 12 News reporter aptly captured this when questioning whether you still found amusement in Edward Adams, husband of Grace Adams. I observed Amy, Eric, and April witnessing as you and your lover publicly disclosed your intentions toward me through the media. It was heartbreaking to witness our children as you casually joked about how effortless it would be to bring down the foolish idiot. Our son Eric remarked, "If Mom sees you as nothing but trash to be discarded, what does she really think of us?" I haven't broached the topic of your future relationship with them yet. Currently, it's fair to say it's non-existent, due to your and Luke's profound disgust and contempt towards me. At least we're both aware that you derive joy from leaving me branded as a clueless fool for life. Perhaps tonight, you and Luke can celebrate your victory with a toast, Ed. Update. Grace's hands began to tremble so violently that she dropped the paper. She appeared spiteful, bitter, and cruel, showing no concern for her children, husband, or anyone else. It was evident that she cared only about herself and satisfying her carnal desires. Her sobs shattered the room's silence. Ed had a knack for undermining one's credibility without direct condemnation. His observations about their conduct left no room for dispute among readers. In his view, every action she took was to sustain her lifestyle, not out of love. He likely realized that Luke was urging her to leave him and the children before April's conception. Luke's new job forced them to accelerate their plans, originally set for after April's high school graduation. While she wasn't laughing anymore, Ed effectively pointed out that their actions validated his words. Ed believed their disdain for him prompted their attempt to destroy him. Without explicitly stating it, it was a declaration of war. If he went down, he'd take them down with him. Grace resumed reading the divorce petition, finding it utterly devastating. One of the suits accused them of fraud for concealing April's true parentage. The damages sought in the fraud case made her feel sick. If Ed won, both she and Luke would face financial ruin. Ed and his lawyer were proving that they could no longer underestimate him as the fool they believed him to be. Update: Saturday was chaotic for my 2 eldest children and me. From early morning until around 4 in the afternoon, we had family members dropping by. Grace's parents, her 2 brothers, 1 sister, and their spouses came to offer their support, each bringing one of their favorite dishes to ensure we had something to eat. Even my brother and sister visited from out of town to check up on me. The 3 of us were enveloped in love and support. Each visitor found it difficult to grasp how they could have been deceived by Grace for so long. They all agreed that what had surfaced on social media proved she was trying to destroy me out of hatred. My father-in-law and I went onto the back deck for a moment, where he suggested I let go of whatever was bothering me. He assured me that Core would keep others away until I felt better and stayed with me until I calmed down. He mentioned plans to revise his will, intending to divide Grace's share among my 3 children. He expressed his disappointment in Grace's actions, stating that he could never forgive her for what she had become. Later, my father called to inform me that April had met the lady and that their meeting went well. Mrs. Smith seemed interested in our family's situation and helped April open up about her feelings. The lawyer obtained the necessary blood sample and had a private chat with my father. They discussed Luke Barrow, and my father shared what we knew about him. It was revealed that Luke's real father was serving a life sentence for a serious crime, and April's arrival had a significant impact on his inheritance. I assured my father that Dale Britton had taken legal measures to keep Luke away from us. Our day had been busy with family members from both sides offering support. My parents were staying as guests at Mrs. Smith's estate, where April was currently with her. They liked Mrs. Smith, and her lawyer mentioned that seeing April had brought a smile to her face after a long time. My mom then spoke to me, mentioning a conversation she had with Mrs. Smith about me and expressing gratitude for how we handled the situation. Mrs. Smith planned to leave everything in a trust for April to be managed by me until she turned 25. Before ending the call, I requested that my parents text me when they were leaving so I could be there when they brought April home. I messaged April, letting her know that we all missed her and sending our love, Dad. Finally, we found time to clean up before David and Cheryl arrived with my car. I apologized to Cheryl for forgetting to return it. Cheryl mentioned that the police chief saw an opportunity to bring down Luke Barrow, and that he and Dale were collaborating. Dale had provided some questionable items for the investigators to examine. David shared that the atmosphere at the office was heavy and everyone was upset. Upon his return, he informed them generally that some of them had been aware of the situation for most of the week and were offering assistance where possible. I commented that it had been an emotional roller coaster since Thursday night and that the kids were still struggling at times, so I planned to take Monday off too. Cheryl inquired if I had heard from Grace, to which I responded that I hadn't since Thursday night. I speculated that Luke and she were probably busy moving on with their lives, as they had publicly made it clear how they saw us. Early Sunday morning, my youngest daughter called to ask if it was okay for her and her grandparents to return home late on Monday. I agreed, pending her grandparents' approval. She thanked me for insisting she go and explained that Mrs. Smith had helped her accept that it wasn't her fault because her mother's affair had brought her into the world. She expressed her love for me before hanging up. Amy, Eric, and I observed as my parents arrived in our driveway on Monday evening. They appeared stressed and weary. As soon as my mom stepped out of the car, she rushed into my arms. I must admit, it felt comforting to have my youngest daughter back home. Dad opened the trunk and brought in her suitcase, which Eric promptly took up to her bedroom. The 3 of them then gathered in the family room so April could share about her new grandmother, allowing my parents and me a chance to catch up. We retreated to the kitchen, where I brewed a fresh pot of coffee while my parents shared their impressions of Mrs. Beatrice Smith. She seemed at peace when we left, Dad remarked. It was as if she had come to terms with her impending passing. Meeting April and seeing her acceptance meant a lot to her. Mom pulled out a legal-size envelope from her purse and handed it to me, explaining, "This was given to me by her lawyer per Beatrice's instructions." I opened it and found a letter, along with a check for $50,000. The letter was brief and straightforward. The grand lady thanked me for fulfilling her request, mentioning that she had already surpassed her expected lifespan before our contact. DNA had confirmed the biological connection, and she commended me for raising April well. She urged me to use the funds to navigate through the challenging times we were facing and to stay true to my values. I allowed my parents to read it, and we pondered the possibility that we had fulfilled someone's dying wish. Over coffee, I briefed them on everything that had occurred during their absence. I expressed my belief that the worst of the emotional turmoil for our family was behind us, and we could return to our normal routine starting the next day. The remainder of the week proceeded relatively smoothly, all things considered. Grace attempted to reach out to each of our children by phone, but was met with rejection. Meanwhile, the corporate headquarters was pleased that I was no longer managing the sales meetings and began the search for a new sales manager for the first time in a decade. As I sat in my office reviewing monthly sales figures, Kathy entered, expressing concern about trouble brewing. I inquired about the issue, and she informed me that my recent letter to Grace had been posted online on the Southeastern Missouri newspaper's website. We quickly accessed the website's Speak Out section and found the letter. Kathy read it aloud, and I acknowledged that I had written it in a moment of emotional distress, wondering if I had been too harsh. Kathy disagreed, stating that the letter simply stated the reality of Grace's long-term behavior in a direct manner. She pointed out that either of them could have ended the affair and come clean, but Luke had enjoyed the benefits without bearing the costs. We discussed how rare it was for society to witness the consequences of someone's actions on a family in such a public manner. Kathy remarked that, as someone who had experienced divorce, it served as a stark reminder of the pain and suffering endured before finding solace. I then mentioned a comment on the website from a longtime feminist, highlighting how Grace and Luke's actions had tarnished the movement for equality and empowerment. Later, Grace and Luke sat at Charlie's Bar and Grill for dinner. Despite it typically being bustling on Friday nights, the place was unusually empty, with vacant tables surrounding them. When they inquired with the waitress, she explained that people were waiting but refused to be seen sitting near them in public, likely because they had read my recent letter to Grace on the newspaper's website. They swiftly requested the bill and departed, Ed, realizing they needed to lay low in public for the foreseeable future. Both were grappling with the reality that their actions had significantly restricted their social circle. As they exited, Grace spotted her parents seated at a nearby table, waiting for their order. She approached them, with Luke trailing behind. Upon hearing her voice, her father addressed them coldly. "Mr. Barrow, I suggest you remove your mistress from here and allow my wife and me to enjoy our meal in peace." Grace left the restaurant in tears, finally comprehending that there was no turning back once you crossed a certain line. She realized she would live with the consequences of her and Luke's actions for the rest of her life. Returning to Luke's place, they visited the website and saw firsthand the public's overwhelming disdain for both of them. Update: I sat in the passenger seat of my car, observing April drive. We departed this morning for Wichita, Kansas, upon learning of her grandmother Beatrice's passing, heading to the airport to catch the private plane provided by the estate. April was deeply affected, having grown close to her grandmother through their frequent phone calls. Amy and Eric had been a tremendous help, bringing the four of us closer together. They were both urging me to start dating again, but I've been hesitant, once bitten, twice shy. Meanwhile, Luke and Grace had relocated to St. Louis. Luke was allowed to start his job early by the feds, with the county eager to rid itself of him once he repaid over $45,000 in questionable expenses. They now resided in a two-bedroom rented apartment, preparing for the possibility of bankruptcy due to an impending civil lawsuit. According to Missouri bankruptcy laws, they could retain only $10,000 each in equity. Our divorce had been finalized according to state law, with Grace obligated to provide child support for our kids while they were in school and cover 50% of their living expenses if they resided on campus. The civil trial for fraud was set to begin in 2 weeks. My kids still refused to speak to their mother, and neither did her side of the family. She had learned the hard way that people will only tolerate so much before walking away forever. April had to endure a meeting arranged by the state's child services with her biological father, which did not go well. She informed him, in the presence of child services representatives, that both he and her mother were dead to her. We attended her grandmother's funeral, after which the lawyer disclosed the substantial inheritance left to us. Overwhelmed, April and I decided to sell her grandmother's home and its contents, except for personal jewelry and a few photos that April wanted. Upon returning home as the school year ended, I prepared for the first day of court on Wednesday when April entered the den. April asked if I could arrange a meeting with Luke, her mom, their lawyers, and Dale on Tuesday, expressing her desire for them to understand the real cost of their actions, an idea suggested by Grandma Beatrice. So I called Dale, and we arranged it. It was a bright, beautiful sunny day when we sat down with Luke, Grace, and their lawyers. April explained that she requested the meeting to Luke, her biological father, handing him a sealed envelope containing his father's location and his request for him to visit him in jail. Disclosing the circumstances of her conception, she revealed that her biological grandmother had left her over $1 million in a trust managed by her father, Edward Adams, until she turned 25, which would have been Luke's if she hadn't been discovered. She warned Luke and Grace of possible legal escalations, urging them to consider mediation before resorting to court. Leaving that meeting, I felt both proud and humbled. My daughter had spoken her truth. Whatever tomorrow held, today I had received the true blessing.
Story 2.
My wife's affair partners exposed her infidelity, so I uncovered the truth and took everything back. I'm a 56-year-old man, and I've been married to my 52-year-old wife for 27 years now. It's been a very long time together, and when you spend that long with someone, it's hard to explain what they mean to you. At the same time, the more someone means to you, the harder their betrayal and lying will hurt you. As I said, my wife and I have been married for nearly 3 decades, and we have 2 adult daughters. For the purposes of this post, let's call them Sophie and Cassandra. They have both moved out of the house and live and work in other states. My wife and I have always had a pretty smooth marriage and have done very well for ourselves. Let me not bore you with the history of my life and marriage, though, especially because what I really need right now is advice. It's taken me weeks to write this, and I've been holding this in so long that I just really need to let it all out. The whole thing started several weeks ago when I received a message on Facebook from a man that I'll just call Pedro. He sent a friend request first, and after that, a message. I had no idea who this man was, but his message certainly caught my attention. Hello, I don't want to alarm you, but I have something very important that I would like to discuss with you. I hope you'll give me the chance to. Needless to say, getting this message out of nowhere from a person whose face didn't ring a bell was sort of alarming. But I eventually pushed it aside mentally because I felt it was probably some kind of scam. He'd tell me that he has $10 million that he needs to unlock in a bank account in Serbia. I was too old and too sharp to fall for that kind of thing, or so I thought. I didn't think about it for the next week or so, but I did end up alarmed despite his intentions when I received yet another message from Pedro. I know this is odd, and I know you don't know me, but I know about you. Please, for my sake, I need to talk to you. It is about your wife. That line caused me palpitations. So, the first thing I did was call my wife. She picked up on the second ring and sounded like her normal self. I felt a strong inclination to ask her whether she knew anyone called Pedro, but for some reason, something held me back. After 27 years of marriage and over 30 years of knowing each other, I'd normally have told her right away, but this time I felt different. The whole situation made me uneasy, and I decided I'd get to the bottom of things before I told her about this saga. Who are you? That was the message I sent back to him. I knew my wife was safe and sound, so I decided I would play around with Pedro to see what he wanted. He answered several minutes later. I'm an old friend of your wife's, and I would love to meet up with you and talk about some things that I really need to get off my chest. He said he was an old friend, but he looked at least 10 years younger than she was. When he said he'd like to get some things off his chest, the first thought that popped into my head was that he was an affair partner. That thought didn't stay for long, but it seemed like the only probable thing with the way his sentences were structured. Again, after 27 years of marriage, I think you'd excuse me for writing off cheating because you'd think you know someone well enough after so long. We kept talking, and I kept trying to pry into what it was that he wanted to talk to me about, but he refused to let anything out. Apparently, meeting up in person was a big element of everything he was saying because he felt it was the right thing to do. Obviously, I was not going to go to Pedro's house or invite him to mine, so I suggested that we meet at a certain public square where I was sure there were public cameras and enough foot traffic. I also took my weapon along with me because I had no idea who this person was. I did let one very close friend know where I was going, though. I was a bit too curious to just block Pedro and move on, especially when he told me enough to make it clear he knew my wife well enough. When I got to the square, I sat on a bench and waited for the guy to show up. It didn't take more than 5 minutes before Pedro showed up, looking not too different from his profile photo on Facebook. The first thing that struck me was how he was dressed: a button-up shirt done up to the top, dress trousers, a belt, and nice black shoes. I remember thinking about how it looked like the kind of outfit someone would wear at a church. He came up to me, shook my hand, and with sort of a sad smile on his face, he said, "Good day, sir. I'm so sorry for pulling you out of your house to come all the way here, but I really need to talk to you about something incredibly important to me." I told him that he could go on because his face looked like he was waiting for permission. I lived a very different life for the past several years, but this year I found Christ, and he has changed my life. Suddenly, I wondered whether this was some elaborate evangelism, especially because I wasn't religious, and I didn't necessarily hide that from people close to me. He seemed to predict what I was thinking, and quickly shook his head and waved his hands. No, I'm not here to preach to you." I relaxed on hearing that, and he kept talking. As part of my journey to be a better person, I've asked God for forgiveness for many of the sins I've committed. But I also know that I need to ask for forgiveness from people who I may have wronged in a very significant way. I won't be able to live with myself if I don't. I want to confess something I did in the past that you may or may not already know about, but I need to do this for my spiritual journey. May I? At this point, I was feeling extremely apprehensive because I had no idea what was in this guy's mind. I wanted to say no, but my curiosity was raging in my head, so I told him to go on. "Back when your wife worked at her previous job, she was my boss. I don't know how else to say this, but for about 3 years, we had an intimate affair." I remember sort of blanking out as I heard those words. He clearly knew my wife. She's now an executive at her company and knew enough about her and her previous job. But part of me felt the whole thing was an elaborate scam of some sort. I couldn't figure out how, though. Pedro looked at me at that moment with a stupid look of concern, but as suddenly as I zoned out, I came back to my senses and asked him, "Do you have proof of this claim you're making?" He could just be a troublemaker after all. "No, I don't." And as he said that, I felt extremely relieved. There was no proof of what he was saying, and I needed a reason to not believe him. There wasn't any evidence of his claim. He asked me if I would forgive him for what he had done, and I told him that I couldn't because I didn't believe him yet, and even if I did believe him, forgiveness would certainly not come right away. He told me that he understood, and a minute or two later, I stood up, thanked him for coming clean, and I went back home. To be honest, I still didn't believe him that night, or the next. I saw my wife later that night, and she seemed perfectly normal, so it was evident that she didn't know anything about the situation. She's never been that good of an actor. I really wrestled with the urge to tell her all about the conversation I had with Pedro, but again, I just had to hold myself back. Which was incredibly hard because she and I shared everything. I trusted her, but there was some doubt asking, what if what he had said was true? I think that was the moment I decided to do my own investigations. Because if Pedro didn't have proof, maybe her phone or her laptop would. So when she slept that night, I stayed up. I always fall asleep before her, so this wasn't out of the ordinary. I did a lot of digging, a lot more digging than I'm proud of. I went through every single social media application that she uses, both on her computer and her phone, but I found nothing. I even dug through her emails, using search terms to find anything explicit that might have been shared. Honestly, I felt like I'd found the closure I was looking for at that moment. I felt like Pedro was a liar whose motivations I would never understand. But when I remembered that he mentioned how the affair had started at work, I decided to check Slack. Let me just say that I found what I was looking for. I guess she used Slack because it kept things limited, out of her personal life. There were 2 CO workers in her direct messages on Slack who she was heavily flirting with, and they flirted back. It was the kind of explicit talk where it was almost sure that the people involved had gone the whole way with one another. I would have shared what I read, but I'm sure you'll all understand how unhappy thinking about it, and especially reproducing it here, makes me feel. I feel stupid, obviously, because I was talking all this talk about 27 years of marriage and how well I know my wife, but I really learned a lot about her in these past 2 weeks. A lot. I feel like a fool because I really never could have imagined that she'd be the kind of woman to cheat. Maybe that was my mistake from the start. Well, I documented everything I saw on her Slack and kept it securely. Obviously, Pedro had been telling the truth, and now I knew that my wife had intimate relationships with at least 3 men that she had worked with. It is crushing when I realize that the number is probably much more than that, but these were the ones I was able to find out about. This happened about 2 weeks ago, and I haven't said anything to my wife about it. In fact, it is quite hard for me to have done nothing at this time because I keep feeling like she's still meeting up with these men. So, I've decided to take action, but I need advice. 27 years of marriage is not little at all, and I think having some weeks for my mind to settle after what I learned, I'm ready to be cold. And I'm ready to make sure there are consequences to her actions. I'm not sure exactly how to proceed beyond divorce though, so I'd love some suggestions. Edit, my children are adults, so fortunately there won't be a custody battle or anything. However, I am scared of them hating me for the way things might go. My daughters have always been extremely close to me, but divorce is something I am not eager to put them through, despite how old they are. However, they'll deal with it. They're old enough that I don't need to put them first. Another edit, I saw some really great suggestions for getting back at her affair partners. I know a lot of you might not agree with this, but I think I might let Pedro off the hook, partly because he's repentant, and partly because I wouldn't have uncovered this whole can of worms if he hadn't decided to confess. Either way, I'll be back with another update, hopefully soon, to let you all know how things went. Well, isn't life just full of surprises? Pedro comes out of the woodwork like a divine messenger, not with $10 million if only, but with news that would make anyone's stomach drop. I guess you never know what kind of Pandora's box you're going to open when you accept a friend request from a stranger on Facebook. At least Pedro didn't show up wearing a trench coat and fedora, right? Just a well-dressed messenger of doom in the form of a button-up shirt and dress trousers. It's almost comical how he segues from, "I found Jesus" to, "By the way, I've been sinning with your wife." So, what's a betrayed spouse to do? Divorce seems like the logical next step, but hey, who knows? Maybe you could spice things up by unleashing some creative revenge. Update 1, first off. Apologies. It's been over a month since my original post, and things in my personal life have been an absolute mess. Related to the wife situation, things are messy, but there's a lot of progress. Well, I took a messy approach, so I knew things wouldn't be pretty. The first thing I did was schedule a video call with my wife, her father, and some of her relatives whom I was closest with. I chose a time when she would be on her break at work, and I made sure to carefully select the people who I knew would have my side, the people with whom I've grown insanely close over the decades. She had asked me what the video call was all about, but I merely told her it was a surprise and she'd find out. Then, the day came. When everyone had hopped on the call, I unmuted myself and began to speak. I'll admit that I mentally rehearsed this because it needed to go well. Pedro Gonzalez, Tim Scaglione, and John Walker. Babe, do those names ring a bell to you? Even though the video quality wasn't stunning, the shock on her face was evident. She looked like she wanted to speak, but I'm sure she couldn't find the words. I guess she was stuck between lying and fessing up, but it was evident that I knew way too much for her to lie to me. This is how you want to do things? Are you serious? You decided to humiliate me after so long? Why couldn't we just talk about this privately? I could hear her voice cracking, and before I could talk, I watched as her hand reached towards the camera and pulled her laptop lid shut. Of course, I had an audience that was incredibly confused, I could see, so I went into vivid detail, telling them everything I had learned about my wife and her affairs. I told them about how I had found out. I admitted to my digging since I had probable cause, and I narrated everything I had found. Her dad was heartbroken, her brother looked pissed, and a few cousins looked like they didn't know what to say, though they looked sorry for me. At the end of the call, I let them know that I was going to start divorce proceedings. Her dad started to talk as if to dissuade me, but her brother cut him off with a "Dad, don't." I think it was evident that I was justified. Weeks before the call, I had spoken at length to the best divorce lawyer in town and retained him. We had already gotten the divorce papers written up, and he seemed very confident that he'd get me a fantastic split. When my wife got back home, I served her with the papers and told her that she'd have to find somewhere else to sleep. She has more than enough money to get a hotel, so I knew she wouldn't be uncomfortable. She looked broken, and she tried multiple times as she was packing a small bag of essentials to talk things over with me. But the ship had already sailed in my head. I didn't give her the listening ear she wanted, because I knew for a fact that there was nothing she would say that would make the situation any better. She hasn't been back to the house apart from once when I was out to pack more things for herself. She hasn't said anything about the divorce papers. In fact, we've barely spoken besides her arranging to come to the house when I would be out. I've also tried my best to keep my daughters out of this mess, at least the details of it. But I know they'll eventually find out. I just hope they don't hate me for it. Meanwhile, I'm also trying to find a way to get at her affair partners, but I don't know much about them beyond where they work and their names. But that might be sufficient now that I think about it. Anyway, that's me bringing you all up to speed. Hopefully, I'll have an update for you all at some point, and hopefully, it'll be a very favorable conclusion for me. Edit, it didn't take long, but unfortunately, my daughters already know about the situation. Their cool uncle let them in on a bit too much of what went down. And they know the details of the discord between their mom and me. The thing is, I didn't want to intentionally turn them against their mom, but it has happened, and it was out of my power. I would never have told them myself. To be honest though, I'm happy that they know. They're not kids anymore, and I prefer not to deal with them lashing out at me out of confusion. Wow, you really pulled out all the stops, didn't you, Opie? A virtual family showdown? But seriously, serving divorce papers over Zoom, that's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for you. And kudos for getting the best divorce lawyer in town on speed dial. Nothing says, I mean business, like having legal firepower at your disposal. As for sparing your daughters the gory details, seems like loose lips let the cat out of the bag a little too soon. Or just in time. Update 2. Hey everyone, it has been months, so I don't know if you all even remember my story, but I'm here with what should be the final update. My daughters got very involved with the process. To be honest, I didn't want them to hate their mother, but they started to get that vibe, especially Cassandra, the younger one and my wife's favorite. When I asked them, they said that they didn't hate her, but I wasn't very convinced. The divorce process went as smoothly as one could go. Of course, it seemed like a 50-50th split of our assets was on the horizon, and her lawyer wanted to fight very hard for the house, which, to be honest, was one of the few things I certainly did not want to give up. Especially because I knew how much she loved the house. My lawyer, a real ace, did a fantastic job of putting pressure on them from a different angle, and eventually one day she told me she'd let the house go. There was also no need for alimony, which made things a lot easier. However, the way she suddenly gave up seemed a bit odd to me. I found out why she did that, though, much later. She and Cassandra had a huge falling out, and by the sound of things, it was extremely messy. But apparently, enough was said for my ex-wife to feel like an absolute scumbag. She had lost all loyalty from her nuclear family and many of her relatives, and I think she just got tired of fighting. She does well for herself, so the assets were never do or die for her. Eventually, the divorce was finalized, and I'm now a newly singled man after nearly 3 decades of marriage. My wife lost her marriage and her family, but I wasn't done. In fact, I waited until the divorce was finalized before the very final part of my plan. Just to recap, my wife was an executive at a pretty snazzy finance company, and she had cheated on me with at least 3 men who were subordinate to her in the workplace. Yes, she seemed to have a thing for cheating on the job. Her company policy is against such vertically stacked relationships in the workplace because it can be hard to tell when there's a severe power imbalance at play. Like I said, all 3 men directly reported to her, and that certainly went against company policy. Pedro, the repentant affair partner who let me in on my wife's behavior, was a key character in this. I messaged him the same way he had reached out to me and decided to dig into the relationship he had with my wife. He said that he had felt very pressured at the start, almost bordering on harassment, because she was his boss at the time. But he eventually eased up and enjoyed the intimacy. I remember telling him that it was probably like Stockholm Syndrome. He never would have eased up on his harasser if she hadn't put so much pressure on him in the first place. He knew it was wrong and against company policy then, but he still did it. Pedro, I think you should come clean to the company. You came clean to me because you know you sinned against me, but you also did wrong to the company by breaking policy, even if you don't work there anymore. On top of that, she has pressured at least 2 other people after you, and she'll keep doing this if you don't put a stop to it. I knew I was being too on the nose with what I wanted, and he knew I was divorced, so I was afraid he'd see my revenge for exactly what it was. Whether he did or not, I don't know, but he agreed to report to the company. About a day later, he sent me an email he had drafted. I made a few tasteful changes, and he sent it out. Long story short, the company launched a pretty lengthy internal investigation. Made even easier since I slid him the names of the 2 employees I knew that she had flings with. She was suspended while it was ongoing, and at the end of the day, she was terminated. One of the affair partners was let off the hook because he had enough text evidence to show that he was hounded by her. But the other guy didn't have enough proof, and the company seemed to feel it was cleaner without another party to the scandal. After 27 years of what I thought was a good marriage, I found out that my ex-wife had messed around with at least 3 men. So, her marriage failed, parts of her nuclear and extended family blame her for the discord, and she eventually lost her cushy job. I even managed to get one affair partner out with her. I kept the house too, and I'm not paying any kind of alimony. To be honest, this is the best case scenario when someone took you for a fool for 27 years, and I'm glad that dishonesty has finally come to a close. I look forward to starting a new life. This should be the last update, so thank you to all of you for entertaining me with your comments and providing a lot of helpful advice. I hope you'll never need to write a post here like I did. Take care, everyone. Look who's ending their saga with a bang. You certainly orchestrated quite the spectacle, haven't you? First off, kudos on handling the divorce like a seasoned pro, OP. Splitting assets, negotiating terms, and coming out on top without having to fork over any alimony? That's a kind of victory that deserves a slow clap. But you didn't stop there, did you? Oh no, you decided to go full vigilante justice and take down your ex-wife's career while you were at it. It's a fitting end to a tale of love lost and justice served. What do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for joining us today.
Story 3.
I'm in a unique situation and want to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. I'm not the wounded person here. My husband, kids, and parents bear the burden of my past mistakes, for which I am genuinely sorry. Let me be straightforward. About 19 months ago, I was caught having an affair with a married neighbor and father of 3. I'm a 32-year-old woman, my husband is 39, and the neighbor, whom I'll call Steve for confidentiality, was 27 at the time. I made a terrible mistake having the affair with Steve, which began a little over 2 years ago. While the affair lasted nearly 5 months before being exposed, I was physically with Steve only 4 times in total. I know it's hard to believe, but I swear it's true. Well, let me tell you something. I don't believe it. To address questions about my marriage that I'm sure everyone reading this has, were we having issues? Did I not love my husband? Was I unhappy? The answer is a definite no to all those questions. I was completely content and fulfilled in my marriage, and I love my husband and our 2 boys, ages 9 and 11, more than anything in the world. Jim satisfied me emotionally, mentally, and physically. He was everything I ever dreamed of and more. My attraction to Steve was misplaced and stemmed from a deep place that took me back to my first romantic encounter at 18. It was a wild attraction, just like my first time. It was like a wild animal instinct inside me that drove me to this. In high school, I dated 4 boys, but nothing serious beyond a quick kiss at the end of the night. In fact, I considered all those guys as friends since we all grew up together. One day, I was invited to a barbecue at a friend's parents' place where I met Charles. Charles was my friend's cousin, and from the first time I saw him, I was captivated. I was taken at the time. He was 20, and I was 18. From the moment we met, we couldn't keep our eyes off each other. I don't know what it was, but there was something between us that drew me to him, like a magnet to steel or a magnet to metal, she says. We started talking at the barbecue, and he had to leave for work, so we exchanged numbers the next day. On Sunday, we met for ice cream in the evening and took a walk. We talked for hours, totally engrossed with each other, and just spontaneously started kissing. He invited me back to his apartment, and there I had my first experience. Something about Charles excited me and made me want to give him every part of me. To this day, I can't describe it. It was subconscious. I couldn't resist. Beyond the physical relationship, we had nothing in common. In fact, we were incompatible. I ended things with Charles 11 months later, after the passion wore off. A year later, I met my now husband, Jim. He checked all my boxes, and I knew he was the one. We got married a year later, and our marriage had been 13 years of joy until I ruined it. We were blessed with 2 wonderful boys who are the spitting image of their dad and share his awesome personality. I'm sharing these details to explain why I started a relationship with Steve. Steve and his wife, Marcia, moved into our neighborhood, and they were the youngest couple. My husband and I are the second youngest, with the others mostly in their 60s. Everyone warmly welcomed Steve and Marcia. They were invited to a neighborhood picnic where Steve and I first noticed each other, similar to when I first met Charles at a family barbecue a long time ago. The next time I saw Steve was at the car dealership where he worked in finance. We were looking for a new SUV, and when my husband found out Steve worked there, they started talking. We went the next week to check out cars. Steve made sure we got a good deal, and he arranged great financing. Throughout the closing process, Steve and I exchanged glances, but my husband didn't notice. A few days later, I had to bring the vehicle back for mud flaps, and that's when Steve and I had our first inappropriate meeting. He greeted me in the lounge, and then in his office, he mentioned additional financing details. We chatted, and he confessed he wanted to talk to me alone about his feelings. I admitted I felt something too, but it was wrong. He knew it was wrong but didn't care. He wanted me. Fast forward to the next morning, when we had our first closeness encounter at his house after our kids went to school and our spouses left for work. By the way, my husband has a good job, and Marcia is a licensed practical nurse. Steve and I only had physical relations 4 times in the entire 5-month period. There was no love connection, as I loved Jim and Steve loved Marcia. What we had was just physical, and to be honest, it wasn't as good as what I had with my husband. Not even close, but it was forbidden, and therefore thrilling and dangerous. Looking back now, being a stay-at-home mom for 11 years made me desperate for attention from this attractive younger man. I thought I could have this secret adventure and still maintain a loving marriage with my husband. That idea came crashing down one Thursday morning, 19 months ago, when Steve and I were caught in bed at his house by Marcia's mother. She walked in on us, fully engaged, and started screaming obscenities. She slapped and scratched Steve, leaving a large gash with her nails. She also hit me square on the jaw and pulled out 2 handfuls of my hair before I could gather my clothes and leave the house. When I got home, I was completely shocked by what had just happened, and the reality of my actions sank in. I realized my perfect marriage to Jim was forever changed and could end because of this. I sat silently for a couple of hours, just staring at the walls, wondering how to tell my husband. Eventually, I decided to call him and left an urgent message, stating that I had something very important to discuss. He didn't respond, so I texted him, but still got no reply. A few minutes later, Marcia and her mother showed up on our front porch, knocking on the door in the bay window, screaming for me to answer. Terrified and thoroughly embarrassed, I didn't respond. Luckily, my boys were at school when this happened. After they left, I laid down on the couch, crying. I briefly fell asleep, but woke up to the sound of a car door in the driveway. I looked out and saw my husband. I rushed to freshen up before going back into the living room to greet him when he opened the door. However, he didn't enter. Instead, I saw through the window that he was walking down the street toward Steve and Marcia's house. I watched as he spent nearly 3 hours there before coming home. I went to hug him, but he kept me away. I started apologizing, but he said my apology wasn't accepted, and he wanted me to leave. I fell to the floor, crying and begging, telling him I didn't want to go, but he insisted. He then called my mother, explained what I'd done, and asked her to come over and pick me up. Mom came over, apologized to Steve, convinced me to go back to her house for the night, and helped me pack some clothes. I left, crying, asking Jim what he would tell the kids. He said he would take care of it. I left, broken-hearted and ashamed. That night, I called Jim, and to my surprise, he answered. He just said hello and went silent. I identified myself, apologized, and promised never to do something like this again. I expressed my commitment to spend the rest of my life making it up to him. Jim remained silent, asking if I had anything more to say. I said no, and asked him about his feelings. He told me he knew what he was feeling, and I started crying. He then said he wanted me to stay at my parents' house for a couple of weeks before coming home. I reluctantly agreed, but asked when I would get to see him and the boys again. He said he didn't want to see me now, but agreed to a brief call every evening at 9 o'clock. The first call ended with me saying, "I love you," and Jim saying nothing, just hanging up. The next night's call went the same way, with me apologizing and Jim staying silent until I stopped talking. He then dropped a bomb, saying he wanted a divorce. Hearing this, I broke down and begged him for another chance. He refused, acknowledging he'd lose half his hard-earned assets. Then, he unexpectedly said he'd give me everything he owns if I just disappeared and left him and the boys alone. I broke down again, insisting he didn't mean that, but he affirmed that he did. We ended the call, and I cried all night. I then started thinking of how I could make him stay, and came up with a plan to offer him a post-nuptial agreement so favorable he couldn't refuse it. All I wanted was a second chance to prove my love, regardless of the cost. The following week, while Jim met with his divorce attorney, I consulted my own lawyer, not to prepare for divorce, but to create a post-nuptial agreement to present to Jim before receiving the divorce papers. I visited 4 different attorneys before finding one who specialized in post-nuptial agreements and was willing to create such a lopsided agreement. Lopsided in that my husband would receive nearly all the benefit in exchange for remaining married to me for a period, giving me a second chance at love. Unfortunately, Jim's lawyer completed the divorce papers in just 11 days, and I was served at my parents' house 2 days later. I had Jim served with the proposed postnuptial agreement. We talked that night. After he read the proposal, he was a bit surprised at what I had offered, and for the first time, I could sense the caring person I once knew coming through, not the angry man who had been so robotic and cold for the past 2 weeks. The agreement is a complete win for Jim and an opportunity for me to prove I'm worth keeping. I won't go into specific details about the postnuptial, but I can confirm that it allows Jim to keep nearly all our marital assets if we stay married and live together for at least 30 months. Also, if I'm unfaithful again and we divorce, I lose all claims on our marital assets, get nothing, and forgo any alimony and child support payments. The agreement also requires me to get a full-time job within the next 6 months and contribute to our household expenses. Finally, my husband can see other women if he chooses throughout the remainder of our marriage. I know Jim would never be unfaithful. It's not in him. But I want him to know I love him enough to give him this option. To my surprise and delight, Jim accepted the offer with one additional stipulation. The clause Jim wanted added stated, "There is no requirement for us to sleep together or have any type of cohabitation coitus during the remainder of our marriage." I was saddened and hesitant to agree to this, but I finally did, feeling that with time, I could win back his respect, trust, and passionate love. Things have not gone as I thought, and that's why I'm here. We are now 17 and a half months into our second marriage, as I call it, and our relationship is one of being housemates, raising our boys. Don't get me wrong, I thank God every day for the second chance I've been given, but what we have wouldn't qualify as a marriage. It's more like we are 2 divorced people, cohabitating. Since my affair, Jim has shown absolutely no affection towards me whatsoever. I mean nothing, not even a kiss or a hug. He won't even let me near him to express any type of affection, although I do get in for a hug and a kiss occasionally before he can block me. But I can tell he doesn't like it, so I don't do it very often. Even so, he requires me to submit monthly to at-home STD testing. Also, since the affair, Jim will not go out in public with me, even to family events. When our boys have games, we alternate who takes them. When it's my turn, Jim shows up at the games but doesn't sit with me. Instead, he normally stands on the sidelines with other fathers and acts like I'm not there. The only time we go out together is when we go out of town or on vacations, which we do often. When we travel, he orders adjoining rooms with 2 queen beds each. The boys stay in one room, and we stay in the other in separate beds. I look forward to every trip, as these are the times we are closest and where I've almost been able to break through to him. I told Jim about this and suggested we move from our neighborhood to start fresh. However, Jim said he'd only move if he gets a job promotion requiring relocation. Otherwise, he plans to stay until our boys finish high school. The boys also don't want to move because all their friends live nearby, as do Jim's friends. Since the affair, I lost all my friendships in the neighborhood. Steve and Marcia divorced 8 months after D-Day, but Marcia and her kids still live down the street. The neighborhood women I was once close to cut me off, blaming me for breaking up the family. Now, my home feels like a prison, and I rarely go outside, staying inside or in my backyard tending to my gardens. My boys are often out with their friends in the neighborhood, including Marcia and Steve's kids, but thankfully, their world hasn't changed much. Jim follows a similar routine, hanging out with neighborhood men, smoking cigars, and sipping bourbon at night, either at our house or theirs. After work, the guys enjoy relaxing together. Jim goes to work, hits the gym, and then comes home, usually avoiding the dinner I make. On weekends, he grills and only eats what he cooks, not my dishes. Weekday dinners with my boys have become a great bonding experience. We eat around 4 o'clock when they get home from school, setting the table, helping with final food prep, and cleaning up together. This time has brought us closer, teaching valuable skills, even in the garden where we've created an awesome space. In summary, some things in my life are great, while others are awful. I'm unsure whether this marriage is worth continuing in its current state, or if I should let Jim go now and provide financial benefits. Deep down, I know he's not happy and no longer sees me as his wife or lover, just as a co-parent. I love Jim a lot and will carry the burden of what I did for the rest of my life. I want to return to the loving relationship we once had, but I doubt he'll allow it. Please let me know what you think I should do. I'd appreciate any suggestions on how to successfully earn back my husband's love and trust after betraying him so brazenly. Thank you, Amy. Update. Last month I followed the advice and decided to temporarily move out of the house to give our marriage some space. I rented a furnished apartment nearby and have been living there since. While I miss being with my husband and boys, and I miss my gardens, it's a relief to be away from that neighborhood. There are too many bad memories and vibes there, all of which I know are my fault. I'm not making excuses for what I did. When I told Jim about my decision, he seemed surprised and a bit saddened, asking many questions. His reaction showed me a lot, indicating that he still loves me. I could see it in his eyes. I pick up my boys after school, and they come over to my apartment for dinner and spend the night a few days a week. Jim and I are flexible about it, and the kids can come and go freely between our places. The main challenge now is that being out of the house means I don't see Jim much, and I'm not in a position to talk to him. So I end up calling him, asking silly questions multiple times a week just to stay connected. We've had several lengthy conversations about various things recently, another sign that he still loves me. I know I love him. That's all for now. Thanks and take care. Update. What a journey. Life is like a roller coaster with its ups and downs. Unfortunately, after 2 years into our second marriage, Jim decided that it's best for us to get a divorce. Jim mentioned that he still loves me and might want to rekindle a romantic relationship in the future, but he believes it's challenging to do while we're married. He explained it's something psychological. He feels disrespected and betrayed while still married, but thinks he can let go of those feelings after the divorce. Jim suggested we celebrate our divorce once it's final, possibly even spending the night together. While it might sound like a strange way to part without guilt, I'm willing to go along with it if it means keeping Jim in my life as a partner, lover, and friend. Jim made it clear that even if we reconnect, we won't get remarried. He believes a binding contract isn't necessary if we truly love each other. I agree with that, but I do wish there was a way to do this without divorcing. Regarding the divorce, I've decided to let him keep 3/4 of our marital assets voluntarily, despite him not meeting the postnup stipulations. I won't pursue alimony or child support. Some may criticize me for being generous, but I believe he earned the money and would have given it all to me if I had remained faithful. I'm at peace with this decision and can live comfortably for the next 8 years or more without working. Currently, I am working, so things are even better financially. I want to offer advice to women struggling with temptation, as I have. My suggestion is to resist it. The thrill is not worth the risk. If you find it challenging to control yourself, seek professional help. From my experience, the short-term high is not worth the long-term loss of love, respect, and trust. I'm a 32-year-old guy married to Kat. We've been together for the past 2 years, dating for 2 years before getting married. Recently, things have not been going well between us. The trouble started 2 months ago when my wife suggested we open up our marriage to add excitement. I was surprised by her suggestion. I never thought she'd bring it up. I want to clarify that I'm not trying to control her, but given our history, it's tough for me to believe she's interested in trying this. Let's face it, open marriage is risky and often ends up hurting one or both partners. I told her clearly that I'm not comfortable with an open marriage. It's not that I'm against trying new things or spicing up our married life, but I want those things to stay within the boundaries of a closed marriage with no third person involved. She was disappointed because it's rare for me to deny her something. I love her a lot and usually go along with her requests, even if it means making compromises. Although she didn't say anything after our conversation, I could sense that she was not happy about it. I wanted to get to the bottom of the situation and understand her reasoning. I began questioning my abilities in bed. I wanted to talk to her, but she remained silent. Kat is a consultant with a busy work schedule, often working in different time zones, which disrupts her work-life balance. While I also have a hectic work schedule, it doesn't require me to go beyond our time zone, making it easier for me. Due to her work schedule, I couldn't discuss my concerns with her. I blamed myself for impulsively saying no to her. I should have asked for more information before making a decision. I felt terrible. Nearly 2 weeks later, I got home early from work one day and made her favorite meal for dinner. She was happy with my gesture. We hugged and spent quality time together. I took that opportunity to ask her about her suggestion for an open marriage. She immediately became frustrated, accusing me of playing mind games. I didn't trick her. I just wanted to spend time with her and understand her perspective on open marriage. That's it. I got upset with her accusations and asked her directly if I was not meeting her needs. After that, she opened up. She told me about interns in her office who are fresh out of college and in their early 20s. They party a lot and hook up whenever they can. Their adventurous stories planted the idea of open marriage in her mind. She admitted to feeling a fear of missing out when her young colleagues talked about their exciting lives. I listened to her and understood her point of view. It's natural for people to be influenced by tempting things. I told her I'm not comfortable with the idea of an open marriage because I cherish our relationship. Our bond means a lot to me. Before I met Kat, I also lived a wild life in my 20s, doing the same things as others, but I went through the emotional challenges that everyone does. Excitement can fade, leaving behind emptiness. Finding comfort in Kat after meeting her, I didn't want to go back to my old life. We got married, and she was the one I envisioned a family and growing old with. I openly shared my thoughts on open marriage with her, suggesting we reconsider if she was genuinely interested. However, she immediately denied it, though she seemed to understand. I thought she agreed with my opinion during our conversation, but I was mistaken. Everything seemed normal for a few days, but after about a week, her behavior changed drastically. She started acting cold, attributing it to work stress. Recently, she's been behaving terribly, throwing tantrums over trivial things and mocking me as outdated. When I asked her about it, she explained that I'm too stubborn in sticking to my beliefs and not keeping up with trends. I questioned what she meant by following the trend, as I stay updated with fashion, music, and web series. I asked if my reluctance for an open marriage upset her, and she simply nodded, leaving me confused. Throughout this time, her work schedule became busier, with more late nights. Initially, it was only a few days a month, but now she's coming home late almost every other day, sometimes even at dawn. When I confronted her, she mentioned aiming for a promotion, proving her worth for the position. While I admire her ambition, I worry about the truth. Honestly, I'm hesitant to entertain negative thoughts or jump to conclusions. Yesterday, something happened that prompted me to share my feelings and seek advice from the community. I reached home earlier than usual and decided to prepare Kat's favorite lasagna for dinner. Despite her late-night plans, I wanted to surprise her. I messaged her, and she responded that she'd be late, maybe after midnight, dampening my enthusiasm. I spent the next hour playing video games, hungry, but wanting to have dinner with Kat. An urge led me to pick her up from the office, something I'd never done before unless we had plans after work. Thinking it would be a nice surprise, I rushed to her office, a standalone building easy to spot. Waiting outside for 30 to 45 minutes, it was 12:30 a.m., but there was no sign of Kat. Worried, I went upstairs to inquire at the reception. The office was still bustling with night shift employees, and the receptionist informed me that Kat had already left. I regretted the idea and drove back home, only to find she wasn't there either. Concerned for her safety, cheating was the last thing on my mind. I was more worried about her well-being. It was too late to reach out to any of Kat's work friends, and since she had only joined the company 6 months ago, I didn't have their contact information. I felt unsure about what to do. Exhausted and anxious, I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up with the first light of the sun, I hurried to my room. On impulse, I found Kat comfortably sleeping in bed. I rushed to her, tucked her in, and went back to sleep. In the morning, she was already getting ready for work. I asked when she had come home last night, and she mentioned it was around 3 a.m. due to a busy day at work, including a meeting with an Asian client. Curious, I inquired about when she left the office, and she casually said around 2:30 a.m., leaving me shocked. Her response raised concerns. Either the receptionist gave me incorrect information about Kat not being at the office around 12:30 a.m., or Kat was lying about being there until 2:30 a.m. Still feeling dizzy from the previous night's stress, I didn't press further. She called me in the afternoon, asking if I had been to her office. The receptionist had informed her about my midnight visit. I wondered about the receptionist's unusual working hours, but explained why I had gone to her office. She was silent for a moment, then clarified that she had left her office in the afternoon for a meeting at her client's U.S. office in another part of the city. This explained why she wasn't in her office when I checked. I was puzzled by her explanation. She elaborated that her client was an Asian company with a U.S. office, where she participated in Zoom calls with employees in the Asian time zone. Despite this being a common practice worldwide, I felt confused about my own situation. I'm at a loss and don't know what to do next. Should I wait for things to settle or confront Kat again with my doubts? I've confronted her multiple times in the past. Any suggestions or advice would be appreciated. Update. I received some shocking news. Please bear with me as I vent. I attempted various ways to access Kat's emails or her phone's password, but she kept it very private. I tried hard to come up with ideas to uncover the truth, but I didn't succeed. In the last 2 weeks, Kat continued to come home late from work, and we were both giving each other the cold shoulder with very few occasional and transactional conversations. 2 days ago, she was talking to her mom, who has been dealing with kidney problems for the past few years, and her recent blood test results were not good. While she was on the bed talking to her mom, I, out of concern, took her phone to check on her mom while she narrated her tiresome routine of tests and medicine. Something clicked in my head. I peeked at the unlocked phone screen with chat notifications. I got up, walked into the room while talking to her mom, casually entered the washroom while on the phone, and locked the door. I put the phone on speaker, pretended to listen, and read the messages through the notification. The notification revealed that Kat was supposed to meet someone that day for a fun ride. I opened her social media messages, and you were right. She was having an affair. She was involved with these inexperienced coworkers. After a couple of minutes, she realized I took her phone into the washroom, and she started knocking on the door to get it back. I didn't have enough time to read all the conversations, so I quickly scanned her gallery for concrete proof. The gallery was filled with explicit pictures of my beautiful wife in compromising positions with her coworkers. I emailed those pictures to myself and deleted the history. She's cheating on me with multiple colleagues. I felt so sick that I wanted to throw up. Meanwhile, my wife kept knocking on the door, asking for her phone back. I couldn't stand to hear her nagging voice. I unlocked the door, swiftly handed her the phone, and locked the washroom again. Initially, I wanted to rush out and confront her right away. But instead, I calmed myself down and let the anger pass. The chat notifications contained details about the location and the time they were supposed to meet that day. Leaving the washroom, I grabbed the car keys and drove to that location. While leaving the house, she faintly called my name, but I didn't bother to turn back. At the hotel, I chose the darkest table in the lobby, not to cause a scene, but to observe how comfortable she was on her way to cheat. She was supposed to be there at 5 p.m., and I arrived at 3, downing countless shots by 5. I had initially hoped to confront her at home, but God knows what I was thinking. Maybe too numb and unready for a face-off, not even in the lobby. By 6, she didn't show up. I thought she might have sensed my presence and changed the location. Nevertheless, I was too drunk and drained to think clearly. I sat there, continuing to drink. Around 7, I saw Kat. At that sight, my world crumbled. My vision blurred after 4 hours of drinking. I faintly remembered what happened next, reacting in autopilot mode. I got up, staggered to the reception area where she was registering her entry, tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Good luck with your fun ride." I might have said more, but this is the summarized version. She held my hand, attempting to explain, but I don't recall her words. I do remember shrugging her off, freeing my arms from her grasp, and storming out of the hotel. I hailed a cab to my friend's place and passed out at his door. The next thing I remember is waking up on my friend's couch yesterday afternoon. I slept for 16 hours straight. It was Sunday afternoon. My friend Lee made me some lunch along with fresh lemonade. I poured out my entire story to him. He advised me to freeze joint accounts, change passwords, and get an STD check immediately. For someone betrayed so badly, money and all these privacy checks were the least of my concerns. I reached out to my dead phone, plugged it in, and switched it on. The screen flooded with notifications, 100+ missed calls, 50+ voicemails, and countless pleading messages. I ignored it all. After a few minutes, calls and messages from her started again. I blocked her on all platforms. I felt so disgusted that I didn't even read her messages and emails completely. Today is Monday. I've called in sick for the next few days at my office. I don't know how to deal with this. I've been drinking heavily and want to run away from all of this. I don't know what to do now. My friend is searching for some of the best lawyers in the vicinity. Update. I recommended securing our shared accounts, changing passwords for sensitive information, and getting tested for STDs. Thankfully, the test results were negative. Lee assisted me in finding a lawyer, and I shared all the pictures from Kat's phone with him. I temporarily settled with Lee until the divorce is finalized, which worked out well since he needed a roommate. Throughout this time, Kat has been trying to reach me, pleading for us to get back together and start anew. She also contacted Lee, asking for his help in reconciling our marriage. According to her, the hookups were meaningless, and she was just exploring her desires, wanting to feel attractive. I'm uncertain about these Gen Z concepts of desirability and whether the whole idea is genuine or not. A few days after my last update, I sent Lee to my house with keys to collect my belongings, hoping Kat would be at the office on a regular workday. However, Lee found her at home, where she broke down and sought his help. Lee was clever enough to inform her that I was staying in a hotel, not at his place, to avoid any potential drama. Kat informed Lee that she had quit her job, revealing that it all began when interns at work started flirting with her. They made her feel desired and beautiful again, leading her to try various experiences, including illicit ones. Initially, it was a one-time thing, but she later became dependent on the thrill. Since the interns didn't make enough money, they relied on Kat to cover their expenses. She eventually realized they were taking advantage of her financially, but by then, she was already immersed in that lifestyle. When Lee questioned why she didn't confess earlier, Kat claimed she had spoken to me about opening up the marriage due to guilt. However, my refusal to agree prevented her from confessing anything to me. I find it confusing. What's the point of asking for an open marriage after cheating on me? Kat is resisting signing the divorce papers and blaming me for motivating her one-night stands, but she can't provide evidence for her false claims. Now she's seeking alimony, citing mental distress caused by the divorce. If anyone deserves compensation, it's me, as I had to endure the terrible feelings of betrayal. Later that month, Kat's sister, Amy, name changed, contacted me, pleading for reconciliation. She shared how Kat is going through tough times, leading to severe depression due to the interns damaging her reputation at the office. They circulated compromising pictures of Kat having fun with them to other senior employees, mocking her as an easy target. This gossip made her the center of attention at the office, forcing her to leave. Senior employees spread the gossip outside the office network, making it difficult for Kat to get referrals. I reminded Amy that Kat chose to leave our stable married life for a thrilling experience, and now she has to face the consequences. Anyways, I'm moving forward with my life. I've kept my drinking habits in check, focused on working out, eating healthy, and staying busy at work. The divorce proceedings are ongoing despite Kat's resistance. It got delayed, but my lawyer assures me that it will wrap up soon.
Story 4.
From the moment I stepped into Magnetodyne's sleek halls, I felt the curious glances and heard the whispered comments trailing behind me. Starting a new job was never easy, especially when seasoned employees eyed newcomers with a mix of interest and skepticism. I had left behind a broken trust, searching for a fresh start and a place where I could rebuild a sense of normalcy. Joining Magnetodyne was daunting. The busy conversations, constant keyboard clatter, and confident strides of experienced staff were both inspiring and overwhelming. I wanted to fit in, to find a place that didn't remind me of my past. But forming genuine connections in a competitive work environment was its own challenge. When I pushed open the tavern door, the noise was as loud as a stadium cheer. I bet I know what game they're glued to, I thought, a bit sarcastically. The noise dipped as I stepped inside, but I ignored the looks and scanned the room until I saw Marge waving from her table. As I walked over, the volume resumed. Marge stood up as I approached. Unsure of what to do, I offered a handshake, but she pulled me into a warm hug. That gesture meant more than she knew. Most of the executive secretaries had been indifferent toward me. As the president's secretary, Marge was respected, so her inviting me out was significant. "I'm glad you came, Jessica," Marge said as we sat down. "I wanted to get to know you better." "Thanks for inviting me, Marge," I replied. "My friends call me Jess." A cheerful waitress appeared to take our orders. Marge ordered a beer and I asked for a wine spritzer. She raised her eyebrows slightly but didn't comment. "I really appreciate this, Marge," I said sincerely. "It's been hard settling in at Magnetodyne, so it means a lot that you reached out. Some of the other women haven't been very welcoming." Marge patted my hand. "It's not that they dislike you, Jess. You're new. And Mary, the woman you replaced, was with us for years." "That makes sense," I nodded. "And," Marge added, "your appearance might be a factor. Some of the women feel a bit intimidated because you're so Please don't say that, Marge," I interrupted. She raised her brows again as I quickly explained, "I'm not trying to be modest, but I'm not beautiful enough to be a model." She gave me a doubtful look. "I'm not so sure. Most of us would love to look like you, and that brings a bit of envy. They wouldn't envy me if they knew how it's affected my life. Beauty can be more of a curse than an advantage," I said. Marge looked skeptical. "We spend so much on clothes, hair, and makeup to look the way you do naturally. We're the ones cursed." I shook my head. "You might think that, but you'd be wrong." I avoid making eye contact with men because they often take it as an invitation. "Is that so bad?" Marge asked with a smile. "Yes," I said firmly. "It happens so often and most of them are creepy or annoying." "Oh, come on," Marge laughed. "There must be nice guys too." "You'd be surprised," I said. "The nice ones think I'm out of their league, so it's mostly the pushy ones who approach me." "I can't believe you don't get attention from decent men." "What about them? In my experience, they're often worse. They think they're doing you a favor by being seen with you and will ditch you the moment someone else catches their eye." The waitress returned with another wine spritzer. "I didn't order that," I said, confused. "I know," she replied. "That guy over there sent it," gesturing behind me. I turned against my better judgment and saw a heavy-set man approaching. He pulled a chair from a nearby table and sat without waiting for an invitation. "Hey, I'm Al. You looked like you could use some company," he said. "I'm sorry, Al," I said politely. "I'm already with my friend and we're just catching up." He didn't glance at Marge. "That sounds boring. Let's have some drinks and find somewhere more exciting." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not interested." "Come on, sweetheart," he said, gripping my hand with his sweaty one. "You'd have more fun with me than her." I shot Marge an "I told you so" glance before turning back to him. "When did you move to this country?" I asked, feigning boredom. He blinked. "What? I was born here? And yet you never learned what no means," I said, pretending to be amazed. Marge burst out laughing as his face turned crimson. He stood so fast, his chair tipped over. Muttering something under his breath, he left. I turned to Marge. "See what I mean?" "Wow, that was intense," she said, still chuckling. "And that's without me encouraging it," I added. "Imagine if I gave any positive signs. I even have to pick my clothes carefully to avoid too much attention." Marge started to speak, but I continued. "And another thing. I noticed your reaction when I ordered the wine spritzer. I can't afford to relax too much in social settings. I'm always on guard." Marge's eyes widened suddenly as she asked if it happened at work too. I responded with a dry smile, confirming that it did. And quite often. She worriedly inquired if Tom Moffat was involved. I reassured her that he was wonderful and treated me like a granddaughter. Looking relieved for a moment, Marge then narrowed her eyes and questioned me about Mr. Silverbeard, Scott Benson, the sales director, known for his prematurely gray beard and reputation as a ladies' man. I laughed and admitted that he had hit on me on my first day. When she smirked and prompted for more, I added that he continued to do so almost daily, which made her laugh. She then asked about Peter Hamill, the marketing director who worked closely with Mr. Moffat. I told her that while he hadn't directly approached me, he did look at me when he thought I wasn't aware. Marge acknowledged that and noted he was married before asking if there were any others. I nodded and said that nearly everyone except my boss had shown interest. Marge chuckled and asked if there was anyone special in my life at the moment. I told her I was out of the dating game. She expressed surprise and inquired if there had ever been someone serious. Feeling the tension in my clenched fists, I admitted that there had been. but it was a painful story, better left for another time. Marge nodded, understanding, and we switched to lighter topics. By the time we left, I felt like I'd made a friend, which was rare for me. Driving home, I was grateful Marge hadn't asked about the women at work. A few had approached me too. Men were difficult, but at least they were predictable. Women could be worse. Friendly to your face, but full of jealousy behind your back. The following week, I was working on some correspondence when Peter Hamill came by. He waited until I paused typing and asked, "Can I ask a favor?" On guard, I wondered if this was when he'd make his move, but he surprised me. "Do you know Karen, Scott's secretary?" he asked. "I've met her, but not well," I said. She was young, pretty, and seemed smart enough. Scott's upset with her over a late report, and I'm afraid he'll let her go. I wasn't shocked. Scott's department had high turnover, due to his impossible standards and public criticism. Senior management seemed to ignore it, probably because of his impressive sales figures. Peter expressed hope that I could help Karen keep her job. A thought crossed my mind, and I asked if he was romantically involved with her. He looked shocked and denied it, reminding me both were married. I questioned why he would care about Scott's secretary if not for an affair. He explained, looking cautious, that he felt responsible for her since he had hired her. He clarified that he had recommended her for the promotion to Scott's secretary, believing in her potential, but underestimated Scott's harshness. He felt guilty for putting her in that difficult position and wanted to help. I watched him closely for any hidden motives, but saw none. I asked what he wanted me to do. Peter suggested giving Karen some of my work, while Scott was away and writing a positive memo about her to Mr. Moffat, which could protect her from being fired for incompetence. Knowing Scott's need to impress his superiors, I thought the plan might work. Still cautious, I told Peter to have Karen meet me for lunch so I could decide for myself. Peter agreed and left, returning shortly to tell me Karen was on board. We met for lunch, and after a brief interruption from the overly chatty waiter, I got to the point. I asked if she and Peter were involved or if he had made advances. She was genuinely surprised and denied both, insisting she was happily married and that Peter knew her husband. Her response felt sincere. I told Karen I still didn't understand why Peter was helping, but she suggested that he was just a kind person. She seemed sincere, so I decided to help her and outline the plan, which she appreciated. A week later, I noticed Peter near my desk. He thanked me for helping Karen, mentioning he saw my memo on Scott's desk. I replied that I was happy to help and that Karen had potential. Feeling guilty for doubting him earlier, I told him I was impressed by his effort. He blushed, modestly saying it was no more than anyone else would do. As he was leaving, Peter invited me to join him for lunch. Normally, I would have declined, but he seemed genuinely kind, so I accepted. Over lunch, I discovered more about him, including his devotion to his wife, Callie, an accomplished interior designer. He proudly showed me photos of her and her work, which was impressive and had even been used by some company executives. Before Peter could continue, a team member interrupted, needing his decision on expo collateral. Another soon joined with a work question, and before long, a team meeting formed at our table. Peter shot me an apologetic look, but I gestured for him to continue. I watched him work, noticing how he listened, asked questions, and guided his team without intimidating them. They respected him without fear, which was rare to see. As I left, I thought, it's refreshing to see someone in charge who isn't a jerk. Later that afternoon, Marge invited me to the tavern again. I was glad for the second invitation and accepted. After our drinks arrived, she leaned forward and asked if anything was going on between Peter and me. I assured her it was purely professional, explaining we went to the cafeteria after discussing work, which let me get to know him better. Marge raised an eyebrow and asked what I'd learned. I told her Peter seemed genuinely nice and respected as a leader. Seeing she wanted more, I added that he was devoted to his wife. Marge tilted her head, questioning if that was all. I sighed and firmly reminded her that I wasn't interested in male companionship and would never break up a marriage. Her expression softened, and she said, "Someone hurt you, didn't they? Want to talk about it?" I was ready to brush it off, but suddenly I found myself sharing the painful story. I explained that I met my husband during my senior year of college, and we married after graduation. At first, life was great. He loved showing me off, and although I felt uneasy, his excitement made it worth it. He soon encouraged me to wear more revealing clothes, and I agreed to please him. Our relationship started well, and our intimacy was fulfilling for me, though not for him. A couple of years in, he suggested role-playing. It hurt at first, but I eventually played along, imagining actors like Brad Pitt. Marge joked, "Good choice," before quieting down. But that wasn't enough. He pushed me to think about past boyfriends and other men we knew, which made me uncomfortable, but I went along. Then he wanted me to flirt with strangers at bars. After admitting some were attractive, he became more excited, and for a while, our relationship thrived on it. But when he suggested I date someone else for real, I was stunned. I told him he was the only man I wanted, and that I truly meant forsaking all others. He stopped for a while, but soon started again with comments and questions, until he finally said that, to prove my love, I should sleep with another man. Marge, puzzled, asked why he'd do that. Was he looking for an excuse to see other women? I told Marge that I'd wondered the same thing, but my ex had insisted he wasn't interested in anyone else. He claimed he just wanted to watch me with other men and kept saying it would make me happy. I told him the only thing that would make me happy was for him to drop the idea. But he didn't, did he? Marge asked. I confirmed that he hadn't. One Friday I came home to see an unfamiliar car in front of our house. Inside, my husband was speaking with two large men. He introduced them and then shocked me, saying they were there to spend the night with me for his thrill. Tears welled up as I shared how betrayed I felt. My husband, the man I trusted most, was treating me like an object for his own satisfaction, just like so many others had. It was the ultimate betrayal. I made an excuse, left the house, drove to my parents' place, and never went back. After my divorce, I moved away to start fresh, which is how I ended up here. Marge squeezed my hand and expressed her sympathy. I continued, explaining that as he was telling me his plan, I noticed video equipment around the room. He intended to film everything, and I could have ended up online if I hadn't left. Marge's face turned pale. "That's unbelievable," she said. I couldn't stop crying. The worst part was wondering what I did wrong or how I could have saved my marriage. I felt like a failure. Marge reassured me that it wasn't my fault and that there was nothing I could have done to change it. I sighed, admitting that despite her words, I still felt that way. I explained that this experience was why I had no interest in dating. As I wiped my face, I noticed a man approaching our table with 2 drinks. Seeing my tears, he turned around and walked back to the bar. Marge noticed and laughed, saying it looked like I had found a way to keep unwanted attention at bay. I managed a small smile. When we left the tavern, Marge walked with me to my car, giving me a supportive hug and telling me things would get better. I hoped she was right. The following weeks were hectic as Expo approached. It was an important event for Magnetodyne, crucial for launching new components and securing major orders. Success would set the tone for the year. Failure could be costly. Adding to the chaos was a rumor that Mr. Moffat was retiring. I doubted it since he hadn't indicated anything to me. The second part of the rumor was that either Peter or Scott would be chosen as his replacement, dividing the office into pro-Scott, pro-Peter, and anti-Scott groups. Tensions were high, made worse by tight deadlines. Amid this, Mr. Moffat asked me to deliver comments on pricing information to Scott. I discovered Scott was working from home and suggested I bring the materials there. Although I was wary about going to his house, I agreed since it was urgent. Scott lived in an upscale neighborhood, fitting for an executive. I parked, walked up to the porch, and rang the doorbell. But no one answered. I was surprised and tried to look through the windows to see if anyone was home. I checked around the side of the house, but still didn't see anyone. Just as I pulled out my phone to call him, I thought I heard voices from the back. I hesitated, but then started walking toward the back of the house. The voices came from the screened-in porch at the back. As I got closer, I slowed down, sensing something strange. Peeking around the corner, I quickly drew back in embarrassment. The sounds I heard were Scott with a woman. I froze, uncertain about what to do. I was there to deliver materials for Scott, but couldn't announce myself. As I hesitated, I heard the woman, and to my shame, curiosity took over. It had been so long since I'd been intimate, and this unexpected scene captured my attention. It was clear the woman was enjoying herself. I saw her lying on a lounge chair, Scott beside her. His hands moved over her body, making her arch with pleasure. My breath quickened, and I felt a warmth rush through me. Without realizing it, I lifted my phone and began recording the scene. Scott then climbed onto the chair, and the woman eagerly positioned herself to join him. Even from where I stood, it was clear she needed no assistance. The breeze carried the scent of their encounter, making the moment even more surreal. They moved together, lost in each other, and she leaned down to kiss him deeply. I felt a pang of envy. Why couldn't I have someone like that in my life? Scott then shifted positions, taking the lead in a way that showed his confidence and control. She reacted with visible emotion, holding on to him as if seeking closeness. He started speaking, asking if she liked it and comparing himself to her husband. A chill went through me when she answered, confirming his words. Scott boasted about an upcoming promotion, claiming he would treat her husband just as he was treating her. Her moans turned into loud cries, and I worried about being seen by neighbors. So I hurried to the front of the house, left the documents at the door, and rushed to my car. My hands shook as I drove away. What am I going to do? I kept asking myself. Telling Peter would devastate him, but I couldn't keep this to myself. At the office, I struggled to concentrate. The scene replayed in my mind, making me sick. Peter was a good man. Why would she betray him? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up the phone. Peter, it's Jess. Are you going to be in the office for a bit? He chuckled. Yeah, probably working late till the expo. Can I stop by around 5:30? I asked. Sure, come anytime, he said cheerfully. I winced, knowing that cheer wouldn't last. Walking to Peter's office felt like heading into surgery. You know you have to do it, but every instinct tells you to turn around. Peter greeted me warmly, but his smile faded when he saw my face. What's wrong, Jess? I sank into a chair. I have bad news, Peter. I wish I didn't have to tell you this. It's okay, he said. Just tell me. Avoiding his eyes, I explained. I went to deliver documents to Scott's house today. When no one answered, I walked around and heard noises. I looked at his porch and saw this. I played the video on my phone and handed it to Peter. His initial reaction was a bitter laugh. So that's working from home, he said, not surprised. He tried to return my phone, but I urged him to watch further. As he continued, I saw the moment he realized what was happening. His face fell, showing pain and anger. I felt tears come. It's hard seeing someone's world fall apart. When I reached for the phone, he gripped it tightly. There's more, isn't there? He asked, strained. You don't want to see it, Peter, I said, knowing he wouldn't stop. The video played on, with Peter's wife's voice confirming everything. He went pale. I silently wished I'd never have to see anyone that broken again. When the video ended, Peter slumped in his chair. After a moment, he looked up, eyes hollow. The worst part? It's not just that Callie cheated. It's how she held him, kissed him. It was more than an affair. I couldn't find words to comfort him. All I could say was, I'm so sorry, Peter. Suddenly, something clicked. Peter, Scott wanted me to see this. He asked Mr. Moffat to have me deliver those papers. He wanted me to witness it and tell you. Peter's face hardened. He's always hated me. This is his way of getting back. But why? I asked. You two are rivals. But why go this far? Peter sighed. Before you joined, Scott worked for me. I thought he was smart but reckless. I saved his job once when he lashed out over an audit. I calmed him down and fixed the situation. Later, I recommended him for a promotion. Confused, I asked, he resents you for that? Shouldn't he be grateful? Peter shook his head. In Scott's mind, being indebted to anyone is unacceptable. He never forgave me for it. But why reveal the affair? Isn't he risking trouble? Peter's voice was bitter. The company would consider it a personal matter. Scott wants me to react and sabotage myself, or be so humiliated that my work suffers during a messy divorce. He looked at me, his tone serious. And he chose you as the messenger to get back at you for resisting him. I flushed with embarrassment, then anger. But my main concern was Peter. What will you do now? I asked. He clenched his fists for a moment before relaxing. Right now, I'm just going to focus on preparing for Expo. I can't afford to lose my job, but after that, I'm divorcing Callie and figuring out how to deal with Scott. Peter, I've been betrayed before, so I can understand some of what you're going through. If you need anything, just ask. But please, don't do anything that could hurt you. Thanks, Jess, he said quietly. I appreciate it, and I know how hard it must have been for you to tell me. For now, please, keep this to yourself. I'll bury myself in work. That's the only way I know to handle the pain. He managed a small smile. It also gives me a reason to stay away from Callie. As I turned to leave, I glanced back, feeling my heart break. Seeing a good man's life fall apart was devastating. The days leading up to Expo were tense. Some of it was typical pre-event pressure, but there was added friction between marketing and sales. Rumors spread that Mr. Moffat's retirement was near and that Scott Benson might take over. This fueled tension. Scott's team worked hard to impress him, while Peter's team grew anxious at the thought of Scott leading. I became an unofficial part of Peter's team, offering help when I could. At first, I got a few curious looks at the lunch table. But once Peter welcomed me, the team did too. They didn't hide their frustration. If Scott becomes VP, it'll ruin the company, was a common sentiment. It was unsettling to hear talented employees talk about leaving if Scott got promoted. Meanwhile, their respect for Peter was high. When he wasn't around, they shared stories of how he'd helped solve problems, offering advice that motivated them to improve. It was clear who should be promoted, but I knew executives often prioritized short-term gains over long-term well-being. Peter looked more stressed each day, and I worried he was reaching his limit. The pressure of Expo, his rivalry with Scott, and the situation with Callie were wearing on him. 2 days before Expo, I went to Peter's office. It was late, but I knew he'd still be there. Sure enough, he was with a small group, focused on his computer. Not wanting to interrupt, I paused at the door. He looked exhausted, the lines on his face and dark circles showing more than just fatigue. He spotted me and called, "Hey Jess, come look at this," pointing at the screen. I stepped in and glanced over his shoulder at a feed showing an empty room with curtains. What am I looking at?" I asked. "This is a live feed from our hospitality suite at the MGM Grand in Vegas," Peter said. "Watch this." He switched the view to a large hall and zoomed in on a construction area. "That's our Magnetidine booth for Expo," he explained. I frowned. "Why do you need a live feed from Expo?" Peter gestured to a woman nearby. "Debbie, tell Jess your idea." Debbie started excitedly explaining, "This is great. We can monitor the booth setup live and make any adjustments. It'll also let us see customer reactions in real time, and people at headquarters can finally see how their work impacts the show." Others chimed in with suggestions. Peter turned to me. "We've never tried anything like this before, Jess. We'll test it at Expo, and if it works, use it for future shows." "That's impressive," I said. "Mr. Moffat will be pleased." At the mention of Mr. Moffat, Debbie's face soured. "I hope he's impressed enough to recommend Peter over Scott Benson." She looked embarrassed, realizing I worked for Moffat. "I didn't mean it like that," she added, though it was clear she did. I silently agreed. Her comment sparked reactions from others, and Peter stepped in to calm things down. "We're all tense, but this is out of our hands. Let's focus on what we can control." "But if Scott becomes VP, life here will be miserable," someone said. "Exactly. Why can't they see he'd be a terrible leader?" added another. Peter's eyes lit up. "What if they could see? What if they saw me in action?" "Now that would be perfect, but how?" someone asked. Peter shared his plan, and the room buzzed with excitement and questions. The team's objections eventually turned into a solid plan. Peter raised his hand. "This could get attention from the execs, but could also backfire. If it does, I'll take the blame. We need to make sure no one else's involvement is visible." The group protested, but Peter stood firm. They agreed, albeit reluctantly, knowing they couldn't risk their jobs. I admired Peter's willingness to protect his team at his own risk. When the meeting ended, Peter asked me to stay. He looked serious. "Jess, you'll play a crucial role in this. We can try to hide your part, but it could come out. Are you willing to take that risk?" I thought it over. Working for Scott as VP would be unbearable, and what he'd done to Peter, using me to deliver his message, still stung. Remembering my own experiences with betrayal, I felt even more determined. "I'm in," I said. "Thanks, Jess," he replied, clearly moved. The day before Expo, Peter and his team flew to Vegas for final preparations. Once Expo started, it was a constant stream of demonstrations, customer meetings, and visitors at Magnetidine's large exhibit. During my breaks, I visited the control room at headquarters to watch the live feed from the Expo floor. I often saw Peter working with the team, while Scott was usually seen socializing with important clients in the hospitality suite. To be fair, Scott looked capable in that role. Peter's plan was set for the last evening of Expo. After most of the major sales activities were done and when Scott's guard might be down, those of us in the know were tense, waiting for the plan to unfold. Everything had been timed precisely, and all we could do was wait. On the last day of Expo, I stayed at my desk until my phone rang, signaling it was time. I grabbed Mr. Moffat's smartphone. He rarely used it and had left it behind. With my text ready, I headed to the control center Peter's team had set up. On the monitor, Scott and his team were celebrating the show's success, drinks in hand. Peter glanced at his watch and gave a subtle nod toward the cameras. Debbie at the control station responded quietly, "Commence stage 1. Peter's team members began congratulating Scott's people, spreading the news discreetly. Debbie turned to me and said, "Get ready." I watched as Peter approached Scott, extending his hand. "Well, Scott, looks like you've won." "Congratulations," he said. Scott's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about, Peter?" "I heard Mr. Moffat announced his retirement at the executive committee meeting and that you've been chosen as his successor," Peter replied. Scott looked suspicious until one of his team members confirmed it, clapping him on the back and congratulating him. Debbie zoomed in on Scott's conflicted expression as he processed the news. Then she said to me, "That's your cue." I sent the pre-written text from Moffat's phone. Scott jumped as he read, "Congrats, Scott. I announced my retirement at executive committee today. You will be the new VP. We'll talk tomorrow." Moffat Scott pumped his fist. "Yes, I knew it." He showed Peter the text and shouted, "Read it and weep, Hamill." His team cheered, champagne flowed, and the music changed to celebrate. Peter approached Scott and returned the phone. "Any big plans, Scott, or will you follow Moffat's direction?" Scott sneered. "Things will change. Moffat was useless. I'm cleaning house, starting with marketing. And Peter, start updating your resume." He jabbed Peter's chest for emphasis. For a moment, I thought Peter might react, but he stayed composed and said, "We'll see, Scott, we'll see." The crowd around Scott pulled him away from the confrontation, and we heard him shout, "Come on, everyone, let's party. Drinks are on me." Peter turned to the hidden cameras and said quietly, "We got exactly what we needed. Tell everyone to leave the hospitality suite now. No confrontations." He adjusted the mic and the sound cut out. At the control desk, Debbie gave quick instructions, and Peter's team quietly left the suite. When the last person was out, she turned to me with a triumphant look. "We did it." When Moffat and the other execs see Scott's outburst, they'll see the real him, and they won't like it. I felt like celebrating. It seemed too perfect. There might be questions about why Scott thought he was promoted, but Mr. Moffat and the others would likely overlook them given Scott's behavior. Not only had Scott insulted Mr. Moffat, but he also attacked the marketing team, which Moffat respected. I felt confident this would be Scott's downfall. I couldn't sleep that night, so I went to work early. Mr. Moffat always held post-show reviews, and I was eager for this one. The executive suite was empty when I arrived, so I went to Peter's area. There, I found Debbie crying at her desk. "Debbie, what happened?" I asked. She looked up, eyes red. "It's gone, all the footage from last night. The server crashed overnight, and we don't have a backup." Peter walked in, overhearing her. He turned pale. "What do we do now?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. This could be bad." To my surprise, Peter comforted Debbie. "It's okay, Deb. It wasn't your fault. You did everything right. Sometimes things go wrong." "I should have backed it up," she sobbed. "No one could have expected the server to crash," he reassured her. He turned to me. "Get to your office and try to stall Mr. Moffat. I'll think of something." I nodded and left, holding back my own tears. We had lost the evidence, and now Peter had to explain his actions. What seemed like a victory had turned into a disaster. At my desk, I composed myself just as Mr. Moffat walked in, clearly furious. "Call Scott Benson's office and get him up here," he ordered. I called and informed Mr. Moffat that Scott hadn't arrived yet. "Tell her I need to see him as soon as he gets in, and get Peter up here too," he said. I called Peter. "Mr. Moffat wants you and Scott here ASAP," I said quietly. "And he's very angry." Peter sighed. "All right, Jess, I'll be right there." When he arrived, he looked defeated, but gave me a weak smile before entering the office. I thought, it's probably my fate too when Mr. Moffat finds out. With the door open, I listened nervously. Mr. Moffat, usually composed, was direct. "What can you tell me about the events at the Magnetodyne suite last night?" Peter began. "After Expo ended, we gathered at the suite to relax. Then, before he could finish, Scott Benson walked in, looking disheveled but smug. He glanced at Peter and then said to Mr. Moffat, 'Sorry for being late, boss. Last night's celebration got a bit out of hand.' Mr. Moffat glared at Scott. 'What exactly were you celebrating?' he demanded. Scott, unfazed, replied, "My team was celebrating my promotion to VP after your retirement," as if explaining to a child. "What? I never said I was retiring," Mr. Moffat shot back. "Yes, you did," Scott insisted, "at yesterday's executive committee meeting." "I did not," Mr. Moffat said, his tone sharp, and there was no discussion of a successor. Peter exchanged a quick glance with me, clearly uncomfortable with where this was going. Scott pushed on, holding up his phone. "I have your text message here," he said confidently. Mr. Moffat looked baffled. "I never sent you any text." "Yes, you did," Scott said, scrolling through his phone, only to pause and frown. "It's gone. Someone erased it." I thought I saw Peter smirk for a moment, but his expression was blank when Scott turned to him. Scott wasn't done. He grabbed Mr. Moffat's phone from the desk. "No password?" he muttered, checking the text messages, which were empty. "Where are your texts?" he demanded. "I don't send texts," Mr. Moffat said, getting angrier. "I make calls." Scott glanced around suspiciously. "Someone erased the message announcing my promotion?" He looked at Peter, then at me, making me duck out of sight. "Young man," Mr. Moffat said sternly, "we're here to discuss what happened in the hospitality suite. Care to explain?" Scott stammered, "It was just a celebration after I was tricked into thinking I'd been promoted." "I see," Mr. Moffat said coldly. "Ms. Martin, help me set up my computer." I expanded the screen and confirmed it was ready. "Check my email for one from Lucas Masterson," Mr. Moffat directed. He turned to Scott and Peter. "Does that name mean anything to you?" "Yes," Scott replied. "He's president of Masterson Industries, our biggest client." "Good," Mr. Moffat said dryly. "Wouldn't you agree we should maintain a professional image with him?" "Of course," Scott said, puzzled. Mr. Moffat's voice grew colder. "Lucas, an old friend, called last night, asking if our expo conduct was typical. When I didn't know, he sent photos. 'Ms. Martin, show them.' I started the slideshow. The first image showed our sales team at the bar. The next showed Scott on stage, bottle in hand, leading a cheer, the company logo in the background. The following images depicted Scott with two young women, all clearly intoxicated, dancing provocatively. The room gasped when the next photo appeared. One woman had lost her clothes, and Scott was touching her as the crowd cheered. Then the final image flashed. Scott using a 3D model of the company logo inappropriately. "Turn it off," Mr. Moffat barked. I shut down the screen. "Mr. Benson, you disgraced yourself and Magnetodyne Industries," he thundered. Scott, red-faced, protested, "This only happened because I was tricked into thinking I was promoted." "Thank goodness you weren't promoted," Mr. Moffat shouted before regaining some composure. "It doesn't matter why you acted that way. Your behavior was outrageous and unacceptable. Even without our top client witnessing it, you were setting a terrible example for your team." He turned to me abruptly. "Ms. Martin, call HR and security. Have them escort Mr. Benson to his office and give him 15 minutes to gather his personal items. Effective immediately, he is terminated for cause." "Yes, sir," I said quickly, and made the calls. Behind me, Scott yelled, "This is all your fault, Hamill. You set me up." Before he could continue, security arrived and escorted Scott out. As they waited for the elevator, Peter stepped beside Scott. From my spot in the hallway, I heard Peter whisper, "You betrayed me, and now it's your turn," Scott growled, but security stepped in between them. The elevator doors opened, and HR joined them as they left. Peter and I were left behind. As I turned to return, Peter said quietly, "Come see me when you can. We need to talk." I nodded and returned to Mr. Moffat's office. "Anything else you need, Mr. Moffat?" I asked. He looked up, visibly exhausted. "Yes, 3 things, Ms. Martin. First, I'm sorry for making you see those photos. I managed to stop before the worst, but I hadn't remembered what happened before." I smiled slightly at his consideration. "Second, please call Lucas Masterson so I can apologize and update him on our actions." I started for my desk, but he stopped me. "And can you remove those photos from my computer and phone? I don't ever want to see them again." I nodded, taking his phone back to my desk. Before I left, he looked at me shrewdly. "I don't know who led Scott to believe he'd been promoted," he said, making my heart pound. "But I owe them gratitude for exposing Scott's true colors." I thought I saw a hint of a smile before he returned to his serious demeanor. "Now, about that call to Lucas," he said, and I hurried out. By lunchtime, news of Scott's firing spread, and rumors ran wild. I avoided the chatter, not wanting any more suspicion than necessary. I visited Peter's office to share what Mr. Moffat had said, hoping it would reassure him. Although he listened, the weariness on his face persisted. Then, unable to shake my curiosity, I asked, "Peter, who are those women with Scott?" He gave a small smile. "Not sure, but probably free birds," he said. Seeing my confusion, he explained, "People who sneak into trade shows for free food, drinks, and parties. Sometimes more." "You never," I started to ask. "Never," he said firmly. "It's reckless, and I'm a faithful husband." He paused, bitterness crossing his face. My heart ached for him. "When do you plan to confront her?" I asked softly. "Tonight," he said with a sigh. "I have the papers ready, and will give them to Callie when she comes home." "I'm so sorry, Peter," I said. I almost forgot about her with all this Scott chaos. A thought struck me. "Peter, I still have those photos Lucas sent. Would it help to have a copy?" He considered it and nodded. "Yes, please. I want her to see who she chose over me." When I returned with the prints, he was ready to leave. "I need to be there when she arrives," he said, "and I might as well go. I won't be able to focus until this is done." "I understand," I told him. "But if you want to talk afterward, I'm here." "Thanks," he said. "I'd appreciate that. You're really the only one who knows everything." That evening, Marge invited me out for a drink, but I declined. I was drained from the morning's drama and worried about Peter. I couldn't stop thinking about the confrontation he was facing, and I knew I'd be poor company for Marge. For the second night in a row, I couldn't sleep well. I went into the office early, hoping to catch Peter. I was waiting by his office when he arrived, and he thanked me for the coffee I brought him. Seated on the office sofa and chair, I couldn't wait any longer and asked how things went with Callie. "About as you'd expect," he said, and began to tell me everything. I was at the kitchen table when Callie came home. She looked surprised to see me since I usually get home later. She sat across from me and asked what was going on. I handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked, and I told her to look. She opened it and started going through the screen captures from the video on Scott's porch. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing, but when she got to the next picture, she gasped. She flipped through the rest quickly, her face turning red. I couldn't tell if she was more ashamed of what she did or of being caught. "Peter, I know I messed up, but it was just a one-time mistake. You were so busy with work, and it had been so long since we were intimate. When Scott approached me, I couldn't resist." I shook my head. "That's not true, Callie. This wasn't a one-time lapse. It was an ongoing affair." "No, I promise it only happened once." Instead of arguing, I played the video I had copied. Her face changed from discomfort to defensiveness to anger as she watched. When the audio of her laughter about making me a fool played, she shouted, "Turn it off!" I let it go a moment longer, then stopped it. "All right, you know about us. I assume those are divorce papers in the other envelope?" she asked coolly. I pushed the papers toward her, and she quickly scanned them. I thought she'd be shocked, but she was surprisingly calm. "It doesn't matter," she said. "I was going to file for divorce myself once Scott got his promotion. So, you threw our marriage away for the money and status of being with a top executive?" I asked bitterly. "Peter, let's be realistic. You've been working long hours, ignoring me and getting nowhere," she said, and anger flared in me. "I was working for us, to make a better life." She gave me a patronizing smile. "That's what I thought for a while. But while I was redecorating Scott's house, he told me the truth about your career. You're stuck at Magnetodyne while he's about to move up. From the video, it seemed you were more interested in him than his career," I said coldly. She blushed. "Maybe I prefer both to what you offer," she retorted. I felt worn out. "So, you and Scott plan to marry after our divorce and his promotion?" "Exactly," she said. "What if I told you Scott isn't getting that promotion?" I said. Her eyes narrowed. "I'd say you were lying." "What if I told you Scott was fired from Magnetodyne this morning?" I added. I saw a flash of fear before she covered it. "Impossible. His team's breaking records. They wouldn't fire him." I reached into my jacket and took out another envelope. "What's that?" she asked. "Photos of Scott at the expo in Vegas earlier this week. Mr. Moffat found them quite interesting." I showed her the first photo. She relaxed a bit. "No one's going to care about a sales director letting loose after a trade show," she said. She stayed quiet at the second photo, but looked uneasy. When I turned over the next one, she gasped. "Who are those women with Scott?" she asked, jealousy in her voice. "I have no idea," I said. "I've never seen them before, but Scott certainly seems to know them well," I add, turning over the next photo. She said nothing, but her expression darkened at the pole dance image. When she saw the photo of Scott acting inappropriately with the company logo, she slammed her fist on the table. The final 2 photos, showing Scott engaged in various acts with the women, made her break down and cry. "How could he betray me like that?" she sobbed. "How could he embarrass me in front of all those people?" The irony of her reaction left me speechless. After a moment, she looked up at me with red, tear-filled eyes. "Is it true?" she asked. "Is what true?" I snapped. "Scott said you were involved with your boss's secretary." "Is that why you started an affair with Scott?" I asked in disbelief. "I saw her and she's so beautiful. I thought you couldn't resist her." "Not everyone has the same morals as you and Scott. For the record, I've always been completely faithful," I said, shaking my head. "I can't believe you believed a salesman's lies." She buried her face in her hands, crying harder. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and went out to get dinner. When I returned, I saw that Callie had packed her things and left. I felt so bad listening to him. "That must have been awful, Peter," I said when he finished. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly," he said, "my emotions are all over the place. I feel bitter about Callie's betrayal, but I'm also sad about the end of my marriage. I'm glad Scott got what he deserved, but I feel exhausted by everything. Mostly, I just feel drained." "I know it's hard, Peter, but it will get better," I said, even though the executives tried to keep the details of Scott's firing under wraps. Too many people knew some version of the story, and it became the main topic of office gossip for weeks. Ironically, Scott's former team spread the story the most, perhaps as payback for how he treated them. Peter's team kept their thoughts private, but seemed pleased by the outcome. Unfortunately, details about Scott's involvement in Peter and Callie's divorce also circulated. People didn't directly question Peter, but whispers and side glances were common whenever he left a room. I hated it for him, but there wasn't much I could do. Knowing what I did, I stayed quiet and checked in on Peter regularly, finding reasons to stop by his office or join his team for lunch. Marge would sometimes take me to her favorite bar after work. As the CEO's assistant, she likely knew as much as I did, but she never brought it up. She would ask how Peter was doing, and I kept her informed. Oddly, she also asked how I was holding up, though I was only indirectly involved. I always reassured her that I was fine. About 4 months later, Debbie, who ran the control desk at Expo, called me. She said Peter's team was planning a surprise celebration after work and asked if I'd like to join. When I asked why, she explained that Peter's divorce had just been finalized. I told her I'd be there. The celebration was held in a private room at a bar popular with the marketing team. The room was decorated with banners saying, "Free at last," "Peter is available," and "Look out, ladies." It seemed juvenile and tasteless to me, but everyone else enjoyed it. The noise was loud, fueled by several kegs of beer being quickly emptied. It was nice to see how much Peter's team valued him, but when I saw him, he didn't seem to be enjoying the party as much as everyone else. Someone coaxed him to make a speech, and after resisting, he climbed onto a table. He kept it brief, thanking everyone for the party and acknowledging their hard work at Expo. Then he told them to keep having fun and stepped down. As the party continued, I made my way to him and we sat at an empty table. "Thanks for coming, Jess," he said. "What do you think of the party?" I studied his face and noticed the lines around his eyes were still there. "More importantly, how do you feel about it, Peter?" I asked. The smile he was trying to maintain slipped, revealing how unhappy he really was. "I know I should be excited about being single again, but honestly, I just feel down, and I'm not even sure why. I think I know why because it's exactly how I felt after my divorce. My guess is you're feeling low because you're mourning the loss of your marriage. But that doesn't make sense, Jess. I don't want to be with Callie anymore, not after what she did and how she treated me. I could never trust her again," he said intensely. "Of course not," I said gently. "But what you're grieving is different. You probably always imagined yourself in a committed relationship, maybe starting a family. Callie shattered that vision, so it makes sense you feel down. You've lost the life you thought you'd have." He looked at me thoughtfully and slowly nodded. "There's a lot of truth to that, Jess." He looked at me again. "Thanks for being such a good friend." At that moment, some of his coworkers came over and grabbed his arm. "Enough of this serious talk, Peter. Come on, join us." They pulled him away, but he smiled and waved at me as he left. I slipped out shortly after and headed home. Parties like that aren't my thing, but I felt good knowing I could be there for Peter and found myself smiling on my way home. With his divorce finalized, I kept waiting for Peter to lift out of his depression. In some ways, it was clear he was healing, but it didn't seem to change how he acted around me. He would wave and smile when he saw me, and we still connected easily during conversations. But I kept searching for something more that I never found. A couple of weeks later, Mr. Moffat called me into his office. After asking me to close the door, he gestured for me to sit. "Please keep this confidential, Miss Martin," he said. "Remember the executive committee meeting during Expo? I did tell the committee I was planning to retire, but after the mess with Scott Benson, they asked me to stay and help fix things. Now that everything is back on track, I'm moving forward with my retirement. I'll be announcing it after lunch, but I wanted to give you a heads up." I was stunned by the news, but appreciated his thoughtfulness. "There's something else you should know," he continued. "You'll have a new boss, Peter Hamill. I hope that's good news for you." "Oh, Mr. Moffat, I'm thrilled for Peter, but I'll miss working for you. You've been wonderful." I stood up and hugged him. He smiled and said some kind words before asking me to call Peter to his office. When their meeting ended and Peter came out, I made sure to congratulate him on his well-deserved promotion. "Thanks, Jess," he said warmly. "That means a lot." As he walked away, his warmth lingered with me, but by the afternoon I felt down again. At the end of the day, Marge came by and asked me to join her at the tavern. "Marge, I have things to do at home," I said, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. Her persistence, which made her so valuable to the CEO, left me with no choice but to agree. At the tavern, she leaned across the table and looked at me intently. "All right, Jess, what's going on?" "I don't know what you mean, Marge," I said defensively. "Nonsense," she said, surprising me with her rare use of strong language. "You've been moping around for weeks like someone with a sick pet, and today you're acting like it died. I'd think you'd be happy about working for Peter. So what's wrong?" I tried to hold back, but something broke inside, and I found myself wiping away tears as I tried to explain. "Peter's promotion is the last straw, Marge. I don't know if I can handle seeing him every day." "I don't get it, Jess. Why not?" I sniffled. "I know his wife's affair and the divorce were hard on him, but I thought once it was over, he might relax around me, maybe want to go out. But he still treats me like just a friend, part of the team. It's tearing me up." Marge's expression softened. "You really care about him, don't you? You always have." "No," I objected. "I didn't have feelings for him while he was married. I admired him and liked working with him, but it was purely professional. I would never let myself get interested in a married man." "For someone who wasn't interested like that, you sure spent a lot of time with him," Marge said dryly. "I had to," I replied. "He was an important part of Mr. Moffat's team." "Uh-huh, sure," Marge said with a hint of sarcasm. "But after you saw his wife with Scott, your perspective started to change." "How did you know that?" I gasped. Marge just smiled knowingly. Then her expression turned serious. "So you thought you had a connection with Peter and hoped it would turn into something special, right?" "I guess so," I admitted softly. She looked at me for a moment, then said, "You know, you really are being clueless." "Now, wait a minute, Marge," I said, annoyed. "You might be my friend, but you can't talk to me like that." She crossed her arms and leaned forward. "I meant what I said. You're acting clueless. Now listen to me. Half the people at Magnetodyne know you have a big crush on Peter Hamill. But what have you done to show him that?" "I've done plenty," I said defensively. "I visit him whenever I can. I make it a point to sit with his team at lunch in the cafeteria. Isn't that what you did when he was still married?" Marge interrupted. "Well, yes," I admitted. "But not as often," I added weakly. "So how would he know your feelings have changed if your behavior hasn't?" she asked. Before I could answer, she pressed on. "Have you ever even touched him?" "No," I said, surprised. "I would never do that." "I mean, touched his arm or hand, something to create a connection." "I'm sure I have," I said, stalling, but I couldn't remember a specific instance. "You're afraid to touch men because you think they'll misinterpret it, aren't you?" "Maybe a little," I admitted. She continued looking at me. Then she said, "You know what your problem is, Jess? You're too beautiful." I opened my mouth to speak, but Marge cut me off. "Your whole life, you've relied on your looks. You never had to worry about finding men. They were always coming to you. I bet your first husband approached you, not the other way around." I looked down at the table. "Well, maybe. He did come up to me at a college party." "Exactly. You're used to being passive, waiting for the guy to make the first move. If he doesn't, you dismiss him and wait for the next one. And that's not all. You use your beauty as a shield to keep men at a distance, even those you might actually be interested in. And you do that not out of arrogance or ego, but because you're scared. You're afraid to take a risk and open yourself up, worried that you might make a bad choice. So you hide behind your looks, hoping that Mr. Right will find a way to break through those defenses. I was speechless, but Marge continued. I'd bet that the reason you're so afraid is because the one man you chose, the one you believed was Mr. Right, ended up being your biggest mistake. Since then, you've been too scared to take a risk again. So even though part of you wants to build something with Peter, another part tells you to step back and wait. You just linger and hope he'll break through and chase you. I couldn't meet her eyes. She came over, hugged me, and kissed my cheek. Think about what I said, Jess. See if there's any truth to it. Then she left. That night, I lay in bed, tossing and turning, replaying Marge's words. Some of what she said stung, and not all of it was accurate. But I had to admit she'd been right about many things. By early morning, I made a decision. Even then, I barely slept. When I got to work, I made a phone call and moved ahead with my plan. I wasn't sure it was the right move, but at least I wasn't being passive. Shortly after I returned to my desk, Peter came to meet with Mr. Moffat again. They spent a long time reviewing marketing plans, but eventually the meeting ended. As Peter passed my desk, he said, I'm looking forward to working more closely with you, Jess. I took a deep breath and stood up. Peter, I met with HR this morning and arranged for a transfer. In 2 weeks, I'll be starting in a new department. He stepped back as if I'd slapped him. But why, Jess? Did I do something to upset you? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Moffat standing in his doorway looking concerned. I kept my focus on Peter. No, Peter, it's not you. It's me. Over the past few months, I've developed strong feelings for you. But company policy prohibits relationships between employees and their supervisors. And since I want to pursue those feelings, I can't work under you. Over Peter's shoulder, I saw Marge peeking around the corner. I kept my eyes on him, holding my breath as I waited for his reaction. He looked at me in shock. But you never said or did anything, he said. I glanced at Marge. I know, I said. But I'm saying it now. Peter stayed silent, and time felt like it had slowed. Then, with my heart pounding, he stepped forward and took my shoulders in his hands. Given the circumstances, I think we can skip the customary 2 weeks' notice, he said, and kissed me with such intensity and promise that I barely heard the applause coming from Marge and Mr. Moffat.